Looking for the latest comic book to add to your collection? How about the last card for that Magic the Gathering Commander deck? Well, the comic book stores got you covered. Shop online at comicbookstore.tcgplayerpro.com or come in person at 30 North Main Street, Glassboro, New Jersey. Hey, pizza people, welcome back. We have quite a bit to talk about today. A new set just dropped, and we're excited to kind of just get into it, honestly. My name's Hollywood Pizza, and I'm joined by HamHocks42. HamHocks, how are you doing today, bud?
Hey man, I am doing very well. It's been a busy couple of days. New set release. I mean, it's always an exciting time. But yeah, this is a big one. I gotta say, this set. It was funny last year when they announced the sets that were going to be released over the years, or over the year. I was looking at the slate this year, and it's like, okay, New Capenna looks interesting. Return to Kamigawa, holy crap, amazing. Brothers War, are you kidding? Yeah, Dominaria, that's fine, I guess. But now that we're here, it's like, holy cow, this set's not messing around.
Yeah,
And it's
there's a
actually
lot of good
really exciting.
cards.
I'm
Yeah.
loving it. Absolutely loving it.
Yeah, I think the flavor, the cards, just a lot of callbacks to kind of like the magic
Mm-hmm.
that we like. Um,
Yes.
yeah, just a lot going on.
Oh, 100%.
Um,
Now that's the thing I love is they're bringing the flavor of Magic's history and injecting it alongside these newer characters that have come over the years. I don't know. It's like they're doing it all right. I love it. Just so good.
we actually have a few other videos already on some of the other spoilers whenever they came out in general, so you can check those out on the channel. And we're also going to have another video that's going to be top commons and uncommons, so be on the lookout for that. It's going to be links in the description as well for that, and you can probably just see that on the screen here as well, clickable. But we're going to jump right in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over mostly the rares and mythics. We're going to go over honorable mentions first, and then we're actually going to get into our top 10 cards that we think are going to be playable in the set. So, started right off here with Painlands. So, honorable mentions, Painlands, Thran Portal.
Mm-hmm.
Ham, what do you got to say about the Painlands? And they're pretty much probably like the biggest, honestly, like probably the biggest impact of any cards in the set, right?
Absolutely. No, the Painlands and Thran Portal both fit a very important role, and that's giving you access to colored mana in the early game. That's a big deal, and that's really where they shine. At the end of the day, they're a dual land, and they ping you for one every time you actually activate it for a colored mana. So they're frankly not amazing in a lot of ways. They don't have the basic land types. They don't have so they don't have the basic land types. They do enter untapped, which is great. I'm a big fan of that. And that's really the key because right now we have the slow
Exactly.
lands, we have the triomes, both of which enter tapped on turns 1 and 2. And so adding the pain lands and to a lesser extent Thran Portal into the mix that enter untapped on turns 1 and 2, that's a big freaking deal. All of a sudden you're hitting your color intensive 2 and 3 drops on time. And yeah, you're taking a little bit of damage in the process, but it's worth it. And I think that's a price that we're all more than happy to pay. I'll tell you right now, beats the hell out of the snarls, if I
Oh
may
yeah, for
say.
sure. I think yeah, you hit hit it right, the nail on the head there with them coming to play untapped, right? We're losing the pathways, we're
Yeah, the
losing the
pathways. Yep.
creature lands, and even though the creature lands obviously they're known for being creatures, they're also known for just being nice early plays for aggressive decks, mid-range decks where it can come into play untapped early and you're
Hmm.
still able to cast your spells on time. But the pain lands, the Thran, these are all going to be cards that essentially help you a lot. The Thran Portal is a little bit different where, yeah, it's going to do damage. It only adds one color, but it's also going to do something that is vital in this set, which is Domain.
Absolutely. Yeah, the fact that it adds a type to that card is very meaningful. So Thran Portal, if you're not familiar, it is a typeless land that when it enters the battlefield, you choose a basic land type and it becomes that basic land type. And if it's turns 1 or 2, it enters untapped, which is nice. But then it deals more damage to you every time you use it. So it's one of those where it's kind of a double-edged sword, but you do get supreme flexibility with it, which is nice, and it adds the type, so it does get domain. One thing that I want to call out about Thran Portal specifically, there was a question because there are 5 basic land types in Magic, but there is a 6th basic land that was added a
One of
number
my
of years ago now.
favorites.
in Waste. Waste is a cool card. It is a basic land that can tap for colorless mana. So I know there was a question running around about Domain. Can you add Waste as a type and add it to Domain to get like a 6th the Domain count? That actually does not work. When they added Waste, they didn't. I looked into this afterwards because I was like, that's intriguing. Waste is not a basic land type. They specifically designed it to be a basic land that did not have a type on it. So the 5 basic land types that were around since Alpha continue to be the only 5 basic land
That's
types. So
pretty
that's something to
interesting.
keep in mind. Yeah. I figured
Yeah.
that's worth calling out. When you look at the drop down menu and it asks which one you want to pick, there's a reason Waste isn't in there because it was never a basic land type to begin with. But yeah, great cards. At the end of the day, they provide valuable fixing, and we have a lot of really good like 2 and 3 color cards between Capenna and Dominaria itself. Not to mention some really good 5-color payoffs too. I mean, so fixing is going to be clutch, and we have it here. So that's nice.
Definitely. So yeah, I think the Painlands, Thran Portal definitely going to have some of the biggest impact in the set, where you're just going to see those cards in a lot of different decks. They're going to make a lot of different decks kind of hum. The next card that we want to talk about here essentially is another cycle. Just want to get some of these cycles out of the way. Jump on the old bike, will ya? So we've got some lords. We got the Merfolk Lord, the Goblin Lord, soldiers, clerics, and which one am I missing here? I think we're missing
Elf, Goblin, Merfolk, Cleric, Soldier. Right?
soldier.
Did you say Elf?
Elf. Yep, that's the one I was
Yeah.
missing. Yep, elf. Yep.
Yeah. Those
So we
lords are.
have some pretty powerful lords. I can't even believe I forgot about the elf one, considering
Yeah,
it's
of
one
course.
of
I mean,
the
yeah, it's all good.
stronger ones. But
I'm guessing you probably assumed. Oh, I must have already said that one. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't want to
Yeah.
forget the kind of obscure soldier.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
Soldier and Cleric were kind of like deeper pulls, but
Cleric's pretty good, I think.
I
Like
mean, yeah,
the
it's got
cleric
tons of support
one.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't know, essentially they're all like 2 mana cards. They give +1/+1 to their respective tribe, and they all do something a little bit different here. So the Merfolk one essentially is a 1/1, and then you can sacrifice a Merfolk to counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. It also has Flash, so the only one that has Flash.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Goblin, Runvelt, Horde Master. Other goblins get +1 as well. So that's just across the board. Whenever this card or another goblin you control dies, exile the top card. If it's a goblin creature card, you can cast it until the end of your next turn, which seems pretty decent, considering it gives you a couple turns to play it out. We have Leaf Crown Visionary, which is a card that I would have never thought that they would print, considering that it has the kind of like nature's I forget what it's called. Card doesn't come to mind right now, but it's 1 mana, glimpse of nature.
Mm.
And lets you kind of just draw cards for casting your elves. But this one makes them cost 1 green extra. So essentially 2 mana 1/1. Whenever you cast an elf spell, you can pay a green to draw a card. So
The
maybe
elf
that
deck
1
has green
mana.
mana lying around. That's not an
Yeah,
issue. Yeah.
it probably does with the archdruids and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see. Like, I mean, obviously these 3 specifically that I've talked about are the most high powered ones, and then we go into the Valiant Veteran and the Shadowrite Priest. Valiant Veteran is for the soldiers, but then you exile it from your graveyard, put a counter on each soldier control. It's also a 2/2. The black one's also a 2/2, and then that one's 3 colors, 2 black, sack another cleric. Search your library for a black creature card, put it on the battlefield. So I mean, I don't know. Those are the 2 weaker ones, right? Like these teamer, essentially colored tribes are the better ones. The elves, the goblins, the merfolk. The merfolk one's kind of just like this crazy powerful blowout against, non-creature spells. The goblin one is a card advantage. The elf one's a card advantage. The cleric is essentially a tutor, and the soldier is kind of like this weird white weenie card that if you're playing soldiers, it's really powerful. Maybe I don't know. What do you think, Ham? I mean, obviously, like I said, the teamer ones are probably the best ones, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think at the end of the day, they're all really good lords. A 2-mana lord effect is going to be strong in tribals, in a tribal situation. It just is. I think you're absolutely right. The merfolk having flash is a big freaking deal, because that one, you can flash it in buff your entire team potentially in the middle of combat just to really wreck your opponent's math. And then on top of that, if they're trying to say wipe your board, you can flash it in, sack a couple of Merfolk, maybe as little as just one. I mean, the floor on that card is it's a Jawari disruption, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, even in
that's
a
not
like
bad even.
mirror
Yeah.
match, I mean, you can just flash it in, counter, collect the company if they're tapped out,
Mm-hmm.
or just
I
against
mean,
some of these other aggressive decks that play Coco,
yeah,
maybe
it
counter
can
a
disrupt your
Henge.
opponent's plan in a really big way. I think that card is
Yeah,
very strong.
it's really
Um,
strong against like
yeah.
control too, right? Because of maybe not against like Supreme Verdict, but maybe there's some other board wipes around. Then
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty strong. I think just
Yeah.
a pretty powerful effect.
Yeah, it's just great. And once it's on board, I mean, your opponent has to be ready for it. You know, if your opponent is playing some kind of control and they're sitting with say like a farewell in their hand or some other kind of big board wipe that they need a lot of mana to spend, if they see it down there, they I mean, it can counter a spell by not doing anything, you know, because they just can't play it. Like they know they can't play it. Because they try to play it, you sack one, maybe two merfolk at the worst, and you keep everything else. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, it affects you, but not by much. And yeah, I think that card for what it's doing, and especially with how much power those decks, like these tribes, can put on the board. You know, the amount of pressure they can put on your opponent. The fact that the Merfolk one can help protect that board as it's beating the opponent down is awesome. Another huge call out when it comes to Merfolk. We will be returning to Ixalan next year. There, last time we were in Ixalan, the Simic Merfolk tribe got a lot of support. So right now, if you're actually playing in Historic or Explorer, there's a good chance if you're playing Merfolk, you're probably playing with a lot of Ixalan cards. We're going back there. We might see some reprints.
Oh
We might see
yeah.
some reimaginings of some of those cards. So keep an eye out for that.
There's actually a card in
Um,
this set that's really good with the Merfolk one
mm-hmm.
specifically, which is the Vidalian Mindsinger. So
Yes.
this card, a colorless 2 blue 2/2, and then it has an ability that we're going to see quite a bit here in some of the cards that we talk about, which is Kicker. But it's a quote unquote, it's not multi kicker, but it has multiple instances of kicker.
Limited multi-kicker. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, limited multi kicker. So when this one specifically enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it enters with 2+1/+1 counters for each time it was kicked. And then when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature power less than this creature's power, as long as you control this creature. So, yeah, Vidalian Mindsinger, really, really good with the Lord, especially in
Mm-hmm.
uh, the other formats, like you're saying, Explorer or Historic, Pioneer, maybe even, where you've got access to some of these Merfolk Lords, and you don't really even need to kick the Mindsinger. It's just going to come in and be like a 4/4, 5/5, and just be able to take a nice big blocker out of the way, and then turn it maybe into an attacker later. But yeah, how do you feel about that card specifically, even outside of Merfolk decks?
I think, that card has some potential. It reads to me like a kind of a bad Mind Flayer, and the Mind Flayer wasn't particularly impressive, especially in Standard. I don't get me wrong, I used it, and I had tried to come up with some weird janky ways to really leverage it. The problem was it was easy to interact with. In the moment, it's just a 3/3 body, and if it dies, I lose the thing I stole. So that and Mindsinger kind of suffers from some of that same vulnerability, and it isn't able to target quite as many things right away. However, it could be as cheap as 3. So
Yeah,
I'm
and it can
not I'm
be
not
as
turning
big
my nose
as
at the
like
math.
4/4, 5/5, right off some
Right.
of these lords. So
So
at three
could be,
mana,
yeah,
being a
I
big
mean,
beefy body and taking something out of the way, maybe.
yeah. And again,
Um,
in a tempo style deck like those Merfolk decks go for, I mean, they apply a ton of pressure early and disrupt the opponent's plan just enough to close them out. And Mindsinger can absolutely do that. They get a pesky blocker down. Nope, that's mine now. Wham, and just keep going.
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
good stuff.
tempo play can definitely swing the game
Oh yeah, that can be devastating.
quite a big direction. So we talked about some lords, some of the cycles so far. Let's go talk about some of these mythics. The first one here
Hmm.
that we want to talk about was one that was actually pretty close to our top 10 list, and that's Sarah Paragon. So essentially, this is a Angel Luris.
Hmm.
Two colorless, two white, 3/4 angel flying. Once during each of your turns, in case you want to take more than one turn, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. So essentially, you get to pretty much play anything, any permanent spell, 3 or less from your graveyard once a turn, and then you can't really like get it but continually back because you end up having to exile it if it ends up leaving play Um, it's specifically the graveyard.
Hmm.
But so I mean, you could bounce it to your hand, um,
True, I suppose.
and you can maybe keep replaying them. I mean, you gain 2 lives, so that's trying to mitigate some of the non-comboiness. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, put it in your hand seems pretty good way to get around that. But overall, I think that the card is it's really strong. I'm not really sure, like, so the effect is really strong on this card, but is it maybe just the stats that kind of detract from it, right? Where 4 mana, 3/4, it's like, I mean, in a world where, we've got a lot of dragons that are on rate, 4 mana, 4/4, things like that, maybe like, I'm kind of like talking to in like a general sense, because I mean, in standard, the stats are looking pretty good for what most of the sets that are in standard have to offer. I guess it still loses in combat to some of the other flyers, but
Hmm.
I don't know. Do you think that's maybe like a detractor of it? That
That's
kind
definitely
of
part of it.
led
That's
to
definitely
us
part of
not
it. I
having it
think
there?
Yeah, I think the card is good. There's no question about it. It is a strong card. And if you're going to be running any kind of angel list with Giada, this is a slam dunk. Do it. Like, because you're going to have plenty of 2 and 3 drops that it could theoretically recur from the graveyard.
Kill my
You're going to be
Valkyrie. I don't mind. Get it
I
back.
mean, go for it, right?
Yep.
Let's do it.
Hmm.
So that could be great. Like there are opportunities for this card. The real deal breaker for me, or not really deal breaker, because I'm still gonna run it and some stuff. But one of the things when I first read this, I was like, they're printing Mega Luris in standard. Are they insane? There's no way that that isn't going to be completely cracked in half. What I had not really respected or really appreciated was how powered down that effect is if the permanent you return exiles. You know,
Yeah, especially
the
in like a
fact that
sacrifice type theme,
mhm,
anything like that.
yeah, because the real power of Luris, especially in older formats, is when you have things like Mishra's Bauble, or one of my personal favorites was Kaya's Ghost Form. Being able to loop Kaya's Ghost Form basically made Luris indestructible. It was awesome. Like you could do weird stuff like that, and being able to recur those threats over and over every turn. You sacrifice a thing, you just get it back. You sacrifice it again, you just get it back. And like Mishra's Bauble, the reason that the Mishra's Bauble Luris was so powerful in older formats like Modern or even Legacy is because when you get those 2 cards online, you just have this 3 mana engine that just says draw an extra card every turn. Like that's awesome. It's simple, but
Hmm.
it does the thing. It does, and it's just it
This
accrues
kind of
so much
feels like
card
that a
advantage
little
throughout the
bit.
course of the game. But
Like
Sarah
it.
Paragon can't give you that style of effect because whatever permanent you bring back exiles when it dies. So you can't just sack Mishra's Bauble and keep it going over indefinitely. The ability to grab 3 drops, however, is pretty sweet.
Yeah,
Because
there's none of that
yeah.
kind of Laris clause on it where you can't get back like your graveyard trespasser, but this can.
Hmm.
This can
But
totally
now all of
get
a sudden,
back
yeah,
that card.
your Graveyard Trespassers, your Fable of the Mirror Breakers, I mean,
Nixilus if you're playing
your
Mardu.
Obnixiluses, your Kaitos. I mean, all of a sudden, there's a lot of
Ooh,
really good
Rafine. Let's
stuff.
go.
Rafine, 100%.
All
Why
right.
not? Yes, and yeah. Actually, that in a Rafine style, like as
Discard type
for
deck.
like mid range
Yeah.
thing, yeah. Oh yeah, let's go. I'm in. Yeah, that could be very strong. So I think Sarah Paragon is still very good, but it's not completely cracked the way Luris was.
What I
And
really like about
yeah.
it is that it's not legendary. I think that that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest things that led me to almost having it near like our top 10 or kind of having it as one of the best cards, which it is one of the best cards in the set, but it's not like still, I don't think it's like the best card. I think it's like kind of in the middle. It's got a lot of value, but it's not, the card doesn't end the game by itself. Like I said, maybe if
True.
it was like a 4 mana 5/5, 4 mana, even at 5/4, I think I would be like, oh yeah, this card can kill an opponent in 4 swings. And on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, you're getting some crazy cards potentially back from your graveyard. But as it is, I think the 3/4 body is maybe a little bit too weak, but
Yeah.
the effect is
Well,
strong. So
and
there's a chance that you can grind out maybe in your mid range deck with it.
yeah.
We
Well,
can see some other Mardu cards in this set that are pretty decent.
absolutely. And you touched on it perfectly there. Like, it is not the card that's going to end the game. Like, if my opponent slams that, my immediate reaction is not, crap, I need to deal with that right now. My thought is, I'd like it if I can get rid of that before the end of the next turn. If I have to let that, if I let my opponent untap with that, I'm probably going to be okay. There are other cards that we're going to talk about today where it's like, if I let my opponent attack with that, I am
Yeah, I
hosed.
probably lost the game.
Yeah, and like we're going to be talking about those later. But like Sarah Paragon, I thought was going to be in that kind of camp, and previously, but I'm down on it. Yeah, so I don't think it's quite that strong.
Still a really good card though.
Yeah, pretty solid.
Our next card I actually like as well. Another mythic here. We have Karn Silex. So essentially, this is a artifact. We actually have quite a few
Mm-hmm.
powerful artifacts in the set here. I'm just getting down to it. So Karn Silex, 3 colorless legendary artifact. Enters the battlefield tapped. Players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. X, tap, exile this card. Destroy each non-land permanent mana value X or less. Activate only as a sorcery. I just think that this card is actually really, really good. I think that it shuts off just a lot of different strategies. Obviously, the first one that came to a lot of people's minds was fetch lands.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's kind of like a Yasharan type effect in terms of the can't pay life to cast spells type of thing. It's not necessarily like hosing sacrifice decks completely just by themselves, but I don't know. I mean, the second part of it too has like this pernicious deed for anyone who's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Pernicious deed type of effect where you're kind of able to just destroy everything in play. On top of that, with the 4 mana Karn that's not in this set, Karn Liberated, you can actually continually get it back as long as you're doing it for like 3 or less, and your Karn sticks around. Yeah, what do you think about this card? I mean, it's pretty interesting mythic, right? It's like it reads a little bit like a hate card, and then it obviously hates where it destroys everything. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting. At the end of the day, I think the value on this card, I think this card gets significantly better in formats as people are paying life for things. If you're in a
Mm-hmm.
format where for like old school Phyrexian mana is a thing, this is golden. Like take gut or like gut shot, was the tragic slip or whatever. Like get those things out of here. Like they don't dismember. They just don't work anymore. Or you have to you have to pay the mana for them, which is not what a lot of those decks want to do. So that's great. But you're right. It has also this really big, nasty board wipe that is flexible built into it. So
Kind of like
that's pretty
Ujin
handy.
esque, right? It kind of
Kind
has
of,
a little bit
yeah.
of that feeling where like you can play it early, and then your opponent, like, this card's nuts. Like, I feel like
Hmm.
it's close to being like it's definitely one of the best cards in the set. It's close to our top 10, but um, yeah, I mean, you're just able to destroy everything in play. Literally, just
Hmm.
planeswalkers, creatures, anything that's not a land. Just yeah, I just feel like that effect's so powerful. We don't really see that effect that much in Magic anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's an interesting card for sure. And like I was saying, in older formats, I think it's gonna be stronger because yeah, fetch lands, shock lands, it completely hoses those. It gets around. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. In standard right now, we don't have a lot of cards that require you to pay life. Notably, there are a number of cards out there like Infernal Grasp that do hit your life total. However, they hit upon resolution. They're not a cost. So unfortunately, Karn Silent can't hose those cards. Uh, which it is what it is. If Infernal Grasp had red as an additional cost to cast this spell, pay 2 life, then it would. But unfortunately, that's not how it's written. So,
It's really good against
but
tokens. You can
really good.
just
Yeah, potentially.
for 0, pretty much 3
Yeah,
mana, put
just
into play. Then
get
the
them all
next
out of here.
turn, yeah, just
Yeah,
exile
that could be
everything.
interesting.
Um, just a really strong card overall. Like I said, it's like
Mhm.
it reads like a sideboard card, and then it also has like this main deck effect that, I mean, even control decks would potentially want this card, right? Where you're just like, I don't care, I just play it, and whatever range of mana that I have available, I know
Yeah,
that my opponent isn't going to be able to keep that card on the battlefield.
yeah. I mean, if super low cost, like if token decks or low man value aggro decks are a thing, that could be a good way to shut them down in colorless. That's the other thing. Like that could go in any deck. That's a big deal. Yeah, we can't forget about that.
I
So
just really like this in the mono green deck. I'm telling you, like, you
okay.
play your elf. I don't know if you obviously wouldn't main deck it, so I guess maybe
Hmm.
playing it on turn 2 isn't necessarily like a that much a realistic thing, but it could be. I mean, it's a strong card. It's
Yeah.
mythic. It does some mythic things.
Hmm.
We'll see where it actually ends up. Our next card here, we have Urborg Lurgoyf. So we actually talked a bit about this in one of our previous videos, but Essentially, it's a colorless and a green, and then it has the good old kicker one way or another, one black or a red. Um, and then if you kicked it, every time that you kicked it, you get to mill 3 cards. And then on top of that, its power is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. Um, yeah, pretty strong card. I mean, we've seen Tarmogoyf before. This is a little bit, obviously, of another take of some Lurgoyfs. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it just feeds off of creatures, and you can put a lot of. It's easier to put a lot of creatures in your deck than it is to put a lot of different card types.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically in standard, right? In older formats, it's easier to power good old Tarmo, but I think in standard, this card feeds itself, and on top of that, I mean, in your aggro deck, you could play a couple D's, and later in the game, it's just like a 2 mana 6/7 or something, and you're kind of
Yeah.
just like beating face. And on top of that, if you want to play an Jund, you can do that. If you want to play an Sultai, you got those 2 other available colors, just as Golgari, just as Simic. I mean, this
Yeah.
card, it's interesting, right? There's a lot of different decks that could want this card, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and right now, even in standard, I'm thinking there's a deck that could be made with this. You know, because we have old Stick Fingers, we have old Rutstein, we have Deathbonded Sprout. Like, there are a number of creature cards that care about filling the graveyard and benefiting from that. So we can take advantage of that. Not to mention, we have some killer reanimate targets in Toxrill, Titan, and Titan of Industry. Those are going to be surviving rotation. So, yeah, I mean, those are great, and not to mention a ton of great, reanimation spells as well. So I'm definitely going to be building a Sultai deck around this, no question. That's absolutely happening, and I think Urborg Lurgoyf can absolutely be a part of that because it does 2 things that you need in a reanimator deck. One, you need to be filling your graveyard, and 2, you need to be putting some kind of threat on the board. Usually, that's by reanimating something out of the yard, but in this case, as you go about your game plan, this thing's just going to get huge because Tarmogoyf has a ceiling. Like, when people compare this card with Tarmogoyf a lot, because when you're talking Goyfs, Tarmogoyf is just the gold standard of
By
Goyfs
rate,
for good
it's
reason.
the best
Yeah,
Lurgoyf, right? Like it's a 2 mana,
100%.
whatever. Even though most of the other Lurgoyfs get bigger,
Mm-hmm.
at the rate that you're getting the Tarmogoyf, let's say you max it out at that 8/9, for 2 mana. I mean, that's pretty
That's
silly, right?
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
100%.
almost 10 powered creature.
Yeah, and it's not that hard to get there. Whereas with like the mechanic on this matches the original card Lurgoyf, where its power and toughness are related to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So that's the other thing. It only cares about your graveyard, whereas Tarmogoyf cares about both. So that's relevant. But at the end of the day, this is also only 2 mana. You can kick it for 3 and then it feeds itself, which is sweet. I love that. And you can also kick it for 4 if you have access to both blue and black, and you get to mill 6. Like, that's a big mill. And then as a result, this thing could enter the battlefield as a pretty darn big creature pretty fast. I mean,
Eight
between
nine could
this
happen a lot quicker than Goyf could
mhm,
happen, right?
yeah, between this and old Stick Fingers, you can be putting a ton of power on the board before you even hit your reanimation target, assuming that's what you're going for. And there's even a card in this set that has like affinity for creatures in your graveyard. It's like Necromass, something like that could fit in that deck too.
Yeah, that
I mean,
card's
like there's a ton of stuff that cares about stuff in your graveyard. Not to mention, we still have Cemetery Tampering, the Hideaway card that cares about the yard. I mean, there's a lot of graveyard synergies to be had in even in standard right now that I think Urborg Lurgoyf just slots right into. If you're even if you're in Sultai and you're not manipulating your graveyard and you don't have a ton of creatures in your deck, don't even touch this. It's not gonna do anything for you. But if it's a creature heavy deck and you're filling your yard, put this in there. There's no reason not to.
100%. So next card here is actually another mid-rangey type card. We have Elder Dragon War. This is one of our first sagas here that we're talking about. We have 2 colorless, 2 red. Has the ability read ahead, which there's quite a few sagas that have this. That means that you get to actually choose a chapter to start with. You start with that many lore counters, and after that, essentially you kind of keep going on with the saga normally. So the first ability on this, it deals 2 damage to each creature and each opponent. Second part of the saga, discard any number of cards and draw that many cards. And the last part is you get a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. Ham. This is like a little bit of a bigger Reflection of Kikijiki. You don't get to copy a card every turn,
Mm-hmm.
but you get a little board wipe and some damage to the opponent. You get to draw more. You get to discard more than 2 cards and draw more. And
Mm-hmm.
then essentially you get a 4/4 dragon that you can later on copy with your Reflection of the Kikijiki. So,
Which you inevitably have, yeah.
oh yeah, of course. Um, yeah, I mean, I see. Yeah, that's I know, honestly, man. I'm not gonna lie. I kind of see that that's where Standard's gonna go. Where like, there's another card we'll talk about later, but yeah, Fable into another saga. Cards that
Mm-hmm.
are hard to interact with feels pretty good, even though this kills your goblins. So maybe you don't want to do that, but I don't know.
But that's the beauty of read ahead. If you have the goblin down and your opponent doesn't have much on the board, you can skip chapter 1.
That's true, actually. Yep, and
You can
draw some
just
more
choose
cards.
not to wipe the board if you have a better board set than your opponent.
Hmm.
Flip side of that, it also deals 2 damage to your opponent's face. That chapter 1. At the end of the day, sometimes, I mean, we've all played those super aggressive decks where you're just like, come on, shock off the top. Come on, shock off the top. Because you know your opponent's down to like 1 or 2, and that's all you need. This can give you that. That's something. And the fail case on this, if you have no other cards in hand and there isn't much on the board, you can just rip it as a 4/4 red dragon with flying.
Yeah,
It's not bad.
Mono red's looking a little bit different. If we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
say that there's gonna be some mono red decks in the format, and I think that it's not necessarily just like all beat down. I mean, we see a lot of
Mm-hmm.
value with these sagas, and the Elder Dragon War is another one where it just does. You're right, it does a lot. It can kill some. You can plan it in a way where maybe you can kill some of your opponent's cards, deal your opponent some damage. You get to discard some of these extra lands sometimes you got laying around in your hand, and yeah, that dragon's nothing to scoff at. Like I said, it's a 4/4. I mean, it can beat the Sarah in the air.
Yeah, Ken.
It can trade with quite a bit amount of cards that are going to be in standard, considering that there's not as many cards that are like a lot higher rate for their mana cost as there used
Mm-hmm.
to be for a couple years now. But yeah, I think that this card's going to slot somewhere in red decks.
Mm-hmm.
It can even be
Yeah.
a card that you just see as like a 2 of, maybe not even like a maxed out 4 of, right? It just helps fill, kind of like the potential to help filter through the deck and give you a threat.
Yeah.
Kind of same way
Well,
Fable does.
100%. And I think the big question is, how are you building your red deck? If you have big red threats that you're trying to get to, this is great. If you're trying to hit 4 or 5 drop, dragons, the defiler, whatever, if you're going for that route and you're trying to hit maybe like Urobras to get some kind of like crazy big value, like in that situation, Elder Dragon War is awesome. If that first mode is going to be relevant, then I think this is good. If you will not want a board wipe on 4, so if you are running a red rush with rabbit batteries and phoenix chicks and a lot like hasty 1/1s into hasty 2/2s into hasty 3/3s, then this does not fit that deck at all because the dragon doesn't have haste, and you would have to go quite a few turn 1 or chapter 1 rather would be detrimental to you if you've built a wide board state, so you don't want to hit that. Hand smoothing, man, that's probably not going to be that great for 4 mana. And then, like I said, the dragon doesn't have haste, so
Hmm.
it's not adding power to the board immediately. So in like the classic red rush, this doesn't actually fit very well at all. But if big red is a thing, or some kind of mid-range deck that leverages red, I could see this, yeah, having a home. Absolutely.
Yeah, I really like it in the mid range strategy where yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
just deals some extra damage, maybe just kill some random little dorks that
Yeah,
are laying around, some blood tithe harvesters, things like that. I mean,
yeah.
just having that
And it,
board wipe against maybe like yeah, the go wide decks is just really strong, right? Where those are the type of decks where your mid range deck could be a little bit weaker against.
right. As somebody who loves his big red, like, what I want to be doing in older formats, I want to go Elder Dragon War on 4 to Ilharg on 5. That's what I want to do. So, just throwing that out there.
So yeah, that's a good card there. I do expect to see it somewhere. We also have Quirion Beastcaller. Just another great card here. A colorless and a green. It's a 2-drop, 2/2 Dryad Warrior. Whenever you cast any creature spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and whenever it dies, you get to distribute the counters that were on it onto any number of target creature you control. I think this card is uh there is a lot of rumbles about how good this card is. I think it's even better than we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Comes in as a 2-drop. It only grows as you just keep playing some creatures out, and then if it dies, let's say it just gets fatal pushed, anything like that, all the counters that were on it, you get to distribute among any number of creatures that you have out. So it's not even just going to go into one, type of eggs, one egg in your basket or whatever type situation. Yeah, I mean, what do you think about this card?
This card's cracked, man. I completely agree. I mean, the fact that it enters on rate as a 2/2, like, even if this thing was a 1/1 when it hit the battlefield, just because of the strength of those abilities, I'd say it might see play. As a 2/2, 100%. Like, it's perfect on curve. It only gets bigger as the game goes on. Even if you draw it late in the game, if you have another creature to follow it up, or you hit any other kind of creatures, have some kind of card draw effects, it still like has an opportunity to get big and do something. So, and like you're saying, the fact that you can distribute the counters, that's amazing. So if you're doing any kind of situation with modified where you're putting other +1/+1 counters on stuff, remember any +1/+1 counter on Query and Beast Caller gets to be redistributed. It doesn't care if it got there because of its ability. So if you're
It's
using
good.
stuff like,
It's good with
I
hardened
mean,
scales. It's good with winding constrictor.
oh
You'll
yeah,
get
all
those
that
additional
stuff.
counters just by you distributing them. It's just. I think this card is super
Excellent.
aggressive card.
Mm-hmm.
Really great in any aggro deck. I think you're gonna see it early. You're gonna see it often. It's really good in multiples.
Mm-hmm.
Just keeps feeding itself, and then they just keep growing and
Yeah.
growing. I expect to
So,
see it in collected company decks. I think
oh,
maybe even some stompy decks and some other formats will probably enjoy this card quite a bit.
definitely. Mono green players everywhere who are looking at your werewolf pack leaders that are rotating out, Beast Caller, slot right in. Like
It's
it's right
kind of
here.
like a better Pell Collector, where Pell Collector
Yeah.
has a certain ceiling, right? Where you're like, all right, it's a 4/4 now. I have to play a lot bigger cards for Pell Collector to actually keep growing. But instead, Beast Caller just literally doesn't care. The more creatures you play, the bigger it's going to keep getting.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it doesn't have trample, but I mean, sometimes there's only so many blocks your opponent can make before they actually have to deal with the card, and before you know it, the Beast
Mm-hmm.
Caller can definitely grow
Well,
quite huge.
also with all the modified synergies like the Kodama from the most recent Kamigawa, that gives this trample as soon as it has one counter on it. So I don't know.
Yeah,
There's
that's a good point.
oh yeah, it's great.
Next card here, we actually have an interesting one. Drag to the bottom. 2 colorless,
Mm,
2 black sorcery. Each creature gets -X/-X until a turn where X is 1, plus the number of basic land types among lands you control. So, the first thing that I really like about this card is that it's +1 on top of the domain. So, just one Triumph, and this is a Languish in standard. So,
mm-hmm.
essentially, Languish coming back if you're playing Esper, if you're playing Grixis. I mean, if you're playing just 4-color decks, any 4 or 5-color decks, anything like that. I mean, I think drag to the bottom. We talked about the Thran land earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think drag to the bottom is going to be a big player. Either main deck for some control decks, and then sideboard for sure, right? I mean, 4-mana board wipe with no real drawback outside of you playing one of your lands into play tapped on turn 1. What do you think about this one?
I think it's awesome. Yeah, if you're playing like any kind of control deck leveraging black, this is great because and especially like you're saying, if in any kind of 3-color situation, this will do the job because we have the triumphs. You're going to be running them. Let's be honest. If you're in Esper, Jund, Grixis, you will want them,
Yeah,
and
John's
so
another
this
one.
is
Yep.
yeah, Jund fits in there. So it's just this is where you want to be. Yeah, I actually wasn't particularly high on this card when I first saw it. I didn't think much of it. Like domain is one of those effects that I tend to kind of turn my nose up at when I'm reviewing cards because it tends to be underwhelming. But I think this is domain done right. And a big part of that is that +1, like you're saying. So even if you have just a swamp, all creatures get -2/-2. In some situations, that might
Yeah,
do the
but
job.
with 2 basics
you
out,
know?
-3/-3 is pretty decent too. I mean, it
Yeah.
kills a lot of cards in the format. I mean, this card is just it kind of gets better, right?
Hmm.
Just the more types of lands you have, obviously, but the fact that we have access to all these lands, man,
Hmm.
I just feel like Languish was such a defining card for a while in the format that it was available in, and the fact that it's back, like Black actually has a real board wipe with this. Obviously, you're not going to be
Hmm.
playing this in mono black, and Meat Hook does exist, but at 4 mana, if I have a Triumph, I'd rather have a drag to the bottom than a Meat Hook. Even if Meat
100%.
Hook's maybe going to gain me some life, being able to
Hmm.
potentially wipe everything that's in play, like a Graveyard Glutton, um,
Yeah.
anything like that. I mean, and then of course, obviously, if you have 4 to 5 lands, like if you have all 5 types out, I mean, -6/-6 for 4 mana.
That's big
That's
time.
yeah, that's big time. It feels pretty good. I mean, I think this card definitely scales Obviously, with the lands you have out, and there's other ways to potentially even get those lands into play. But um, I don't know how I feel about it in older formats, considering that language does already exist. So maybe not there. So this is more of a, for me specifically, a standard card that we're going to see as long as the Capenna lands are out. I think
Mm-hmm.
whenever the Capenna lands leave, excuse me, I think that you're going to see a lot less domain. So drag to the bottom stock definitely gets dragged to the bottom, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I think in the beginning for a few months here, I think we'll see this card somewhere.
100%.
So our next card here, we actually have Academy Lore Master. So this is a blue card, double blue, 2/3 human wizard, not legendary. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player may draw an additional card. If they do, spells they cast this turn cost 2 more to cast. So it's each player's draw step. So at first, I remember I read this card and I was like, wow, this card's nuts. It's for you. Like, oh, it's going to be so crazy. But essentially, we have a card that we haven't seen for a while, Ham, a Howling Mine effect.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this one?
I think it's great. Now that's it. I love the design of this card.
Mm-hmm.
Let me be very clear. It is going to be critical when this is on the board for you, whether you're the controller or the opponent. It is going to be very, very important that you know exactly what card you're hoping to see and exactly what its mana value is. Because if you don't, I mean, and this is also at the beginning of your draw step. So if I'm not mistaken, you have to select this before you draw your card. I may be wrong on that, but
Let me see the beginning of draw step. Yeah, you have to. Yep, you have to choose if you want to do it.
yeah, if you want to draw the other one. So it's
Yeah,
a question like if you just need that one piece of removal to deal with that threat to prevent lethal, and you have plenty of mana lying around, absolutely rip this and see what you can find. But you have to be very careful because if you have 3 mana available and the card you need is 3 mana, don't draw the extra card. Because even if you draw it as your first card, doesn't matter. That second card isn't, is the tax will be too much to deal with.
100%.
So you definitely need to be doing a lot of mana math before you draw your cards to figure out, can you afford this? And I'll tell you right now, especially in the early game, most of the time you can't unless you're playing at instant speed.
I was about to
So,
say, Ham, this card,
yep.
when I first read this card, my immediate thought was, wow, this card's really nuts in control because
Mm-hmm.
you don't really care about casting stuff on your turn. I mean, hell,
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind paying 2 more for my deluge if I
Right?
dig 6 cards deeper.
That's hilarious. I
Or
love
2
it.
cards deeper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I think this
yeah.
card's got some power in like a flash control type
Mm-hmm.
situation, right?
Oh yeah, if you're playing an instant speed, I mean, if you're playing draw go control,
2
yeah,
cards a turn. You don't care if your
draw
opponent's drawing
draw
2 cards a
twice,
turn.
play your land pass. Oh my goodness, because especially
Yeah.
when you're sitting on turns 3 and 4 in those
Settle the
decks, you're gonna
wreckage
want
in
to
your
keep all your
hand.
mana open. You are going to make sure to keep all your mana open anyway, like every time. And so now, if you're playing against that deck, take advantage of their end step when they have used Academy Lore
Yep.
Master. Do that. Turn 3, if they drew the extra card off Lore Master, they might be tapped out. Because if they're sitting on a 3 mana counter spell, even if they have 3 open, it's going to cost them 5. So that's your opportunity to get stuff in. That's your opportunity to hit the kill spells. That's your opportunity to hit, your flash threats, whatever that may be. So be aware of that and watch your opponent if they take advantage of this. But I think this is, well, and that's ultimately what I love about this card. The design of this card that gets me excited is all these weird intricacies. Like it adds another layer of decision making to the game that I think is absolutely fantastic. So A+ on this one. I love it.
100% couldn't agree more. Our next card is actually another one that is another card engine. We have Keldon Flame Sage, 2 colorless red, human shaman. It's a 2/3. It has enlist. So enlist essentially is banding 2022. Whenever this card attacks, you can tap an untapped creature you control as long as that creature doesn't have summoning sickness, which if you don't understand what that means as long as you've had it out for a turn or more. You can tap that creature to give this creature a power boost, essentially equal to the creature that you're tapping. And then whenever this card attacks, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is this card's power. You may exile instant or sorcery, play it for free. The rest go on the bottom. in a random order. When we talked about this card previously in the other videos, I was really, really high on it, and I still am. I think even just looking at your top two, if you're like obviously in like a spell heavy deck, it's kind of like an expressive iteration Delver type ability, right? Where you're just hoping your top card works out, and maybe you're playing like a cheap spell, you're able to play it. But then, if you want to, you can actually tap one of your other creatures to kind of buff this really big in the face, um, and then get to cast something really big off of your top X cards, which could, let's say you tap like a 5/5 for this, you're looking at your top five, and then you can cast something that's 7 or less. I mean, maybe you're casting like an all runs epiphany and taking an extra turn, right? I don't know.
Yeah, sky's the limit on this one. Actually, I think it's funny. Look, going into the rotation before spoilers, I was feeling pretty bummed because a card that I absolutely adore from Strixhaven is going to be rotating out, and that's Velomachus Lorehold. That card is great. It
Oh,
allows you to free cast big dumb stuff off the top of your library. I'm a big fan. Um, and Wizards was like, you know what? It's not a dragon, but it's also only a 3-drop. So I was like,
yeah, and the
all right,
spell's still
sweet, I'll take
free.
it. Yeah, and the spell's still free. Exactly. That's the thing. Like when I first read this card, I expected, as I was reading it, I was expecting that you would be able to play that card this turn. And then the moment I read without paying its mana cost, like, yes, we did it. Like I'm in. What I want to do, I want to run this in a deck that can pump the power in other ways in addition to the enlist. So the first thing I think of is like Gruul aggro with like fight spells and pump spells with things like Halana and Elena partners. You know, that all of a sudden, like that kind of thing could get out of hand. We also have like Invoke the Ancients. You have, some really big, dumb, crazy stuff that you can take advantage of with this card. So if you're in a deck that has a good mix of creatures and spells, this thing has an opportunity to really be cool. So
It's an
I love
interesting
it. I
card
think,
in like the
yeah.
feather type strategies, the Boros
Mm-hmm.
aggro decks and Explorer.
Big time.
Even potentially that type of strategy in standard still with like
Mm-hmm.
Inquisitioner, Inquisitor, anything like that. I think this card definitely has legs. It's not, Enlist is like this weird ability where um, you're kind of sacrificing some of your actual like combat in order to really pump something up and do something
Mm-hmm.
big. I think this card definitely exemplifies the big thing you're trying to do, and I think that this is one of the best enlist cards easily, mostly
Yeah.
because it does everything that you want to do in the deck that you want it in. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in, let's say, some of the white enlist cards, you really want to be attacking with your creatures all the time. It's not really like, oh, I want to try to do like this exalted type thing. Most of the time, that's not really good against other creature decks, and definitely not even good against control. Where control could just be like, all right, I just kill it, and now just give me more time. Um, but Keldon Flame Sage, I think for what it's doing in like your quote unquote is it spells type strategy, maybe whatever your X spell deck is gonna be. I think that it's doing everything you want it to be doing, and it can definitely end the game if you're gonna do something really big and splashy, kind of like you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
So our next card here on the list, we actually have Anointed Peacekeeper. So this is actually a pretty interesting card. It's reminiscent of a card that actually is leaving standard. So Anointed Peacekeeper, 2 colorless white, vigilance, 3/3. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand. Then choose any card name. Spells your opponent casts with the chosen name cost 2 more to cast. Activate abilities as well. If that card costs 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. So um, I always forget what the card's name is. But Paula Vittora, Damo de Rosa,
Elite Spellbinder.
Elite
Yeah.
Spellbinder, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, the difference is Elite Spellbinder flew. It had flying, so it had
That's a
evasion.
big one. Yeah.
And it also only really took that one card and made it cost 2 more. What I
Mm-hmm.
like about Anointed Peacekeeper is that you can literally look at their hand and punish them severely if they have multiple copies of a card. On
Mm-hmm.
top of that, you're getting so you get to tax them. Let's say they have 2 copies of one card. Now each one of those costs 2. If they draw any card in their deck, essentially it costs 2 more of that name. And on top of that, if it's something that uses activate ability, it's gonna be 2 more mana. So if you name like a planeswalker, now the planeswalker's taxed on mana cost, and then the loyalty ability is gonna be taxed on it. And I mean, look at your opponent's hands. One of the best things in the game, getting perfect information on how your opponent's probably going to play their cards out, and you can line your cards up even better. I think this card's phenomenal. Honestly, I
Yeah.
when I first read it, I was like, wow, this is like you're trading flying for essentially a better spellbinder effect.
hmm Yeah, I think so too. The other cool thing about this, you can name a card that they don't have in their hand. So that's something to keep in mind. So if I'm going wide and I have a pretty good board state, and I see that my opponent has 4 or 5 different types of mana down, I can just name Drag to the Bottom, or I can just name Meat Hook Massacre or whatever. Like I can just name whatever board wipe I think they're running, or I know they're running because we're in an open decklist situation, or maybe it's a game 2 or 3 and I've seen it. So I think you're right. This card's great. The fact that it also hoses activated abilities, get out of here. Like that's
It's a
nuts.
3/3. It's got good toughness, whereas like
hmm
the spellbinder was only one toughness, obviously. So maybe blocking wasn't always the best with it, but this card's great. On rate,
Yeah.
vigilance, great ability. You can attack with it. You can block with it. I think this card does a lot. I really expected to get played in like even just like the essentially like the white aggro type decks, whether it be
hmm
Boros or just straight up mono white. I mean, this card's great. Yeah, it stops the board wipes. Like I said, it makes makes the opponent's planeswalkers cost more, and then on top of that, the activated abilities cost 2 more. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's really good. Don't forget. So, what I actually find interesting about this is that the second part of it taxes your own cards. So,
Mm.
um, let's say that you name like Wandering Emperor. Unfortunately, yeah, the Wandering Emperor is going to cost 6 for your opponent, but even you activating the Wandering Emperor is going to cost mana. So I think that maybe that's going to be something to kind of be on the lookout for with this card. I just noticed that now where
No, that's a good shout.
that
Yeah,
specifically isn't towards just opponents. But I think a powerful card overall that we're still going to see.
definitely.
Next on the list, we have Land of Warloam Speaker. We talked about this one quite a bit when it was originally dropped. I don't really think I have too much to add. I think it's just one of the best 2-drop mana creatures that we have available. Colorless and a green, 1/3, tap, add 1 mana of any color. And then tap, target land you control becomes a 3/3 with haste until on a turn it's still a land. Activate only as a sorcery. Yeah, just doesn't get bone crushed in older formats. And
Yeah,
even in standard, it survives like the 2 damage test
yeah,
from the
and
Dragon's War that we talked about. And then later in the game, you're making 3/3s.
it's great. Yeah, no, I love it. I think the fact that it's a decent blocker. You want mana dorks that can block if you have to, so that's always good. And yeah, this is just I think the best 2-drop mana dork that we have. It definitely a standard, and it's a pretty darn good one even in older formats. I think, and the fact that it's an elf doesn't hurt. So yeah, just a really solid card.
100%. I don't really think we have too much more to add outside of that. We talked
hmm
about it quite a bit before. So yeah, just one of the best 2 mana dorks. Expect to see it quite a bit in standard specifically,
hmm
and potentially older formats. Next card on the list, we got Squee. So Squee makes a return here in Dominaria United. We've got all of our great friends back. 2 colorless red, legendary creature, Goblin Noble, 2/2 haste. Whenever this card attacks, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. And you can cast this card from your graveyard by paying 3 colorless red, exiling 4 of the cards from your graveyard rather than paying its mana cost. So essentially ends up being 4 mana, plus 3 cards out of the yard. If there's a red aggressive deck, this card's definitely going to be in it at the 3-drop. On the play, this card's pretty strong, being able to make multiple bodies, essentially like a Den of the Bugbear type
hmm
situation here for anybody who's been playing standard for the past year. Yeah, I think this card's strong. It's going to be in mono red aggressive strategies, and I think even anything that's kind of like aggressive or mills itself. We talked about like the Goyf
hmm
earlier. I mean, you mill a couple of these, and then it kind of just feeds into itself, and before you know it, you got a wide board state and a card that needs to be dealt with quite quickly.
Yeah. No, it provides good pressure. You create a bunch of bodies. So even I mean, Squee fits a lot of different style decks. You're absolutely right. The red aggressive deck, 100%, get in there, make it happen. Even if you're in some kind of sacrifice type deck, it's giving you extra bodies. If you're in a goblins deck, it's creating additional goblin bodies. If you have the goblin lord, all of a sudden those are buffing up. I mean, this card's great. And on top of that, actually, as of by the time you're listening to this, it's probably no longer available in the store. But if you got the pre-order for Dominaria United, Squee can even be your pet now, which is kind of fun.
Oh, I
So
love it.
I know, right?
I love
Yeah,
it. I
good
had to
stuff.
get it.
Yeah, me too, man. I was like, Squee, I can't say no to Squee. Yeah.
So our next card on the list is actually potentially going to be good against the decks. That Squee might be in. So
Very
we have
true.
a temporary lockdown, a colorless 2 white enchantment. Whenever it comes into play, exile each non-land permanent, mana value 2 or less, until this card leaves the battlefield. So yeah, this card just board wipes all tokens of any size. Blood
Mm-hmm.
tokens, clue tokens, beast tokens,
Your
um,
tree folk tokens, yeah, they're
your
all
tree
gone.
of
Yeah.
folk tokens, unless of course obviously the token is a copy of a creature that has
Well,
mana
sure,
value
yeah,
2 or
yeah.
more. But overall, I mean, this card is going to make a huge splash in older formats, and it's going to be the type of card that's the aggro check.
Mm-hmm.
In white decks, you know that out of the sideboard, if they're a control type deck, they're probably playing 1 or 2 of these, and you have to not commit as many of your little creatures onto the battlefield, knowing that this lockdown is going to come down and kind of just kill all of them. Or, I mean, maybe you have some kind of removal where you just destroy it and then you get all your creatures back. So, Outline Liberator is not going anywhere, hint, hint. But
Very true.
overall, I think this card's going to see play. I think that in Standard, not as strong, but still, like I said, a cyber card. And then as the format gets older, this card gets way better.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, completely agree. I think and in aggressive strategies, this is the card you need to be aware of. If you are playing an aggro deck, especially in best of three, like you're saying, I think a lot of control decks are going to be running like one, maybe two of these main, with the rest in the sideboard ready to go. Because if you're running a token strategy, just get all four of those in here, like because it shuts those down so well. If I can hit my rabble rousing and feel like hot stuff, but if you followed, if you are going up against that, hit a lockdown, it's over for me. Like that's it. My whole board's gone. That's devastating. And on top of that, we have a lot of really killer 2 drops that aren't going anywhere. We have the Blood Tithe Harvester. That's definitely a thing. We've got Tenacious Underdog. This exiles Tenacious Underdog as well. Gets it out of the grave, doesn't go to the graveyard. It's gone. But yeah, no. So disenchant style effects, naturalized style effects are going to be valuable because we are going to be seeing cards like this. This is also not the only lockdown, Oblivion Ring style effect in this format. So we're going to be seeing enchantment based removal as just a key thing moving forward.
Those
So
Bosejus are going to
be
be
aware of that.
heavy. You're going to see more
Oh
than
yeah.
just that one random copy of it in people's
Mm-hmm.
decks because you're going to almost just treat it as a spell
Yeah,
rather than a
100%.
land, right? You're going to be seeing maybe even higher land count in decks because of cards
Mm-hmm.
like this specifically, where you know that you can end step discard that Boseiju. It can't be countered unless you
Mm-hmm.
have like maybe like a counter ability type effect, which we might talk about here in a bit. But
Yeah, there are some. Yeah, yeah.
you can blow it up and then get 2 to 3 of your creatures back. I mean, that's pretty powerful, right?
Oh yeah, big time. No, and you're exactly right. Like right now with the channel lands, it's they're kind of a free roll to add one in every deck. So if you're in green, sure, I'll toss a Passaggio in there. Why not? It may come in handy. One game out of every 10. Sure, why not? But no, you're exactly right. All of a sudden, I might be running 26, 27 lands and 3 or 4 Passagios. Because yeah, the first one I might play out as a land, but when I hit that second one, that's the removal spell I need. Yeah.
100%. Our next card here is actually an interesting one. I'm not really sure um, how much this is going to get played, but it feels like a powerful card. A
Mm-hmm.
colorless black, red, green, Soul of Windgrace, 5/4 cat avatar. It's a legendary card. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can put a land card from a graveyard, onto the battlefield tapped in
Mm-hmm.
your control. 1 green, discard a land, gain 3. Red, colorless, discard a land, draw a card. Black, 2 colorless, discard a land card. It gains indestructible. This card gains indestructible until turn and tap it. Um, and it's a mythic. It feels really powerful, Ham. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is just like a key piece in this 5 color deck that we're pretty much kind of gonna build up to here, but um, even in just Jund, it's strong. I mean, if you discard one of your triomes, or if you're milling yourself, maybe you can get a land back. If your opponent is potentially putting some of their powerful lands into the graveyard, you can just take one of those.
Yeah, you
Um,
can also I mean, you can cycle the triomes, like you're saying.
hmm
That's great. Discarding the channel lands, but so you blow something up with Besaijo, this can pull it back, assuming you don't already have one down because of the legend rule.
Yep.
Um, those kind of effects. Like there are ways to get lands in the graveyard to really leverage this in standard right now. I think this actually works really nice if you can sacrifice your lands to various effects, like braids. Like braids lets you sacrifice your land and puts your opponent on the spot to either lose 2 life and give you a card, or they sacrifice a land themselves. So it's not super powerful, but it's something. There is synergy there. I think this card is going to be the value of this card is going to depend on if a lands matter deck can work. If a deck that can leverage lands works, like obviously in older formats where you're already running stuff like Gitrog Monster, like the OG Gitrog Monster, or Terravore, like stuff that's filling your graveyard with lands anyway, then oh yeah, like the decks that are running 30 lands and just using and fetch land style effects like Fabled Passage, that kind of thing. Like yeah, this absolutely could fit in that style of deck. Whether anything like that exists in standard is kind of, I mean, we have some pieces. Like we still have Ren and Seven, so that's something. We still have the Cultivator Colossus. Like that's something. There's a deck that is waiting to come to fruition there, right? And I think this could be a piece of that. I'm not exactly sure how those pieces click together yet, but like you're saying, when you read it, it's just like, this is good. I know there's something here.
there's a lot of
Which is,
value. Like
yeah,
ramping is powerful. Like getting to
yeah,
ramp
big time.
essentially twice or more, and on top of that, it also feeds itself where you have extra lands in your hand, and then you discard them, and then you get them back into play. So no matter what, you're getting your lands. It protects itself. It can gain indestructible, obviously tapping it, but yeah, it
Yeah.
turns all the lands in your hand into triomes
hmm
for 2 mana, and then if you need to, you can gain some life. I don't know. It like I said, it reads powerful, but I'm not sure if there's going to be a deck for it. Maybe it's just one of these cards that is obviously kind of just really really strong for EDH, and then maybe that's it.
hmm
So our next card here on the list, we actually have Namada. It's actually quite an interesting card. We have 2 colorless, black green for a 3/4 with reach. It's a legendary creature tree folk. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, create a 1/1 green sapling creature token. Then you can sack a sapling for a green mana. This card gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Black colorless, sack 2 saplings to draw a card. Kalidas at home, but still a powerful card, right?
Totally.
In that
Yeah.
standard setting, at least.
Yeah. In standard, it's solid. I think um this is fine. Like you're saying, it is definitely Cletus at home. The fact that it can leverage saplings is kind of fun. I think this is probably going to see homes primarily in commander decks that are leveraging saplings already to other benefit, because then if you already have other sapling generators, then this being able to just pay 2, sack 2 of them, draw a card, being able to just turn some of those tokens that you might have lying around into card draw is very meaningful.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the key pieces of just magic engines, right? Is being able to take one resource and convert it into another. And Namada gives you that if you have sapling tokens lying around. The fact that in this case you only get one sapling for each creature an opponent controls that dies. In standard, I don't know how often that's going to happen. I mean, the Anvil sack decks are still a thing, so this is pretty good against those. Because you get tons of saplings and you get chump blockers that can then turn into stuff. Namada also has reach, which is pretty great. That's not something to scoff at. So, and it can grow. Like this can be very large using that pump ability. So, I don't know, but unfortunately it's only till end of turn. Whereas Kalidas gets the counters and has
Yeah,
lifelink.
the lifelink is
Like
pretty big and the
it's tough
counters.
not to compare this to Kalidas just because they're mechanically so similar. Um but I think they are ultimately very different cards. And this one is
Could just
it's
be like a
fine.
really good sideboard hate piece against something
Yeah, I can see
specific.
that. I can absolutely see that.
Next card here on the list, we actually have Joyra, Ageless Innovator. So red, blue for a 2/3. Legendary creature, human artificer. Tap it. Put 2 ingenuity counters on this card. Then you can put an artifact mana value extra less from your hand on the battlefield, where X the number of ingenuity counters on this card. So essentially, first time it quote unquote taps for 2 colorless. The second time it taps for 4 colorless, then 6 colorless, and so on and so forth, +2 every time. Um, yeah, overall, the stats are really good on the card. It's a 2/3, so it can block pretty decent, attack all right. But that's not really what you're going to be wanting to do with this card. I
Mhm,
think you're going to want to be casting like your unlicensed hearse or maybe some other 2 drops for
mhm.
essentially quote unquote free. And then as the game progresses, you're able to maybe cast some really broken artifacts that we haven't seen yet that could be coming out in the Brothers War or maybe some other sets down the line. What do you think, Ham?
Oh, 100%.
Or older
The next
formats?
two sets, the next two sets that we have is Brothers War, followed by Return to New Phyrexia. You better believe those sets are going to have some busted artifacts. And already we have some pretty good artifacts. Like it's funny because I keep saying like, well, if we get good artifacts, then Joyriver's going to be great. And then I'm actually sitting back and looking at it. We have Unlicensed Hearse. We have Reckoner Bankbuster. We have Weatherlight Completed. We have, I mean, a lot of good stuff. We even have cards like Pithing Needle that can do some really powerful stuff in the right situation. We have Karn Silex that we talked about earlier. I mean, there are pieces here. Who knows? Maybe Mech Titan Core has a home with all these crazy vehicles we have running around. I don't know. Maybe I can dream. But the fact that Joyra can free cast some of those artifacts as quickly as turn 3, the fact that Joyra on 2, if Joyra survives, which he has 3 toughness, so that's, I mean, we have some good removal. We have Strangle, we have Lightning Strike, Cut Down, those kind of things. So it's not guaranteed that she survives, but if she does, the turn after, you tap, get a Bankbuster for free. You could just draw a card off Bankbuster, or you could tap 3 and play your Fable of the Mirror Breaker. I mean, that's a hell of a turn right there. And then the turn after
Yeah.
that, you can free cast a Karn Silex or, a crazy 4-drop. I mean, I think
There's
Joyra in
the
the right
ceiling is
shell,
pretty high for this card, right?
ceiling's
Like
so
that's the
high.
thing. Like I think it's a good early card, and then yeah, every turn it just only gets better.
Only gets
That's really
better.
about it.
Yeah, I think that card has an opportunity to be fantastic. Yeah.
Definitely. Our next card here is a card that we talked about a bit in one of our other videos, so we're not really going to go too crazy about it. But Golden Argosy, 4 colorless, for a 3/6 legendary artifact vehicle. Whenever this card attacks, exile each creature that crewed it this turn, then return to the battlefield tapped under its own control at the beginning of this end step, and only crews for 1. So, okay stats, 3/6, that's fine. 4 mana, sure. Crew 1 is pretty amazing, but the fact that you're going to want to crew this with more than one card
Mm-hmm.
is what makes it even better, I think. Yeah, essentially just the Yorion of the format back again. Make sure you keep all your cards that kind of just have a ton of comes into play effects in that deck. But overall, Hammer, what do you think? I mean, this card, it's colorless, so you can kind of play whatever you want with it, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And Droider can cheat it in on turn 4. Just saying.
I
You
mean,
know, just putting it out there.
it's not
It's not
bad.
nothing.
It's
It's not
not
nothing.
bad.
But yeah, I mean, we have a lot of powerful ETB triggers. We have your Graveyard Trespassers that can, eat graveyards. We have like Spirited Companion, those kinds of things that just ETB draw a card. Like, yeah, being able to just blink those repeatedly while attacking with a really big boat. The only criticism with this thing that I've heard, which I think is fair, is that it doesn't have flying, which to be fair, mechanically and balance wise, I don't think it needs flying. But when you look at the artwork, the boat is flying.
It's definitely levitating off of the ground.
Definitely
Yes,
in the air.
yes,
So come on.
definitely in the air. Got a little bit of
Just,
a flame. Maybe it's just like maybe it just hit a ramp, or maybe it just hit
oh,
like a
maybe
really
yeah.
good
It's just
wave.
taking a really sweet
It's
jump.
like,
Yeah, that's
whoo, that wave was good. We got some air on that one.
woo.
All right.
I like that. Actually, that's gonna be headcanon from now on. But yeah, that's anyway. So that's the only criticism I've heard about that, which I think is fair. But at the end of the day, as far as the card itself is concerned, it's strong. It's good. Use it.
Yep.
ETB triggers are a beautiful thing. There are a lot of great ETB cards out there. This is you're gonna
This
want
is
to use
another
it.
one of them. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Next card here, we actually have an angel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just getting to it here. So we have Archangel Wrath, 2 colorless, 2 white, 3/4. Kicker black and or kicker red. Flying lifelink. This card enters the battlefield, feels kicked, it deals 2 damage to any target. If it feels kicked twice, it deals another 2 damage to any target. So essentially for 6 mana, you can shoot something down for 4 damage. For 5 mana, you get to shoot something for 2 damage and still get the 3/4 flying lifelinker. I talked about earlier how 3/4 maybe isn't the strongest in terms of stats, but I don't know. I kind of like this a little bit more because it can kill something and it has lifelink, right? I mean, for
Mm-hmm.
6 mana, you can kill the card that would block it, maybe
Yeah.
get in the way. It fits into just red white decks. It fits into just white black decks. It fits into your 3-color Mardu deck. I think this card's somewhat solid, right? I mean, Flame Tongue Kavoo, it is not, but um,
Sure.
still up there, I think, right?
Yeah. No, I think this card's really good. Like you're saying, for 6 mana, you can blast 4 damage worth of things. You can spread them out between 2 targets. You could just, pile it on, take one thing out. I mean, this could kill like Sarah Paragon that we were talking about earlier. Like this could
Yeah,
kill it
that's
if you have
true. Yep.
6 mana. And on top of that, the angel has lifelink, and the angel is the source of that direct damage. So as you're dealing that damage, you're also gaining life off it, which is pretty sweet. So I think the card is quite solid. It does what it does it well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
100%. Expect to see it potentially in some mid-range strategies. Our next
definitely.
card, Ham. Our next card, I really like, want to love it because I'm such a green mage, and I do like it a lot. But let's get into it and we'll talk about it. Silverback Elder, 2 colorless, triple green, 5/7 ape shaman. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to choose one of these 3 abilities: destroy an artifact or enchantment. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Tap. Put the rest bottom randomly, and you can gain 4 life. So my biggest pet peeve with this card is that it doesn't have reach. I think
Mm,
that what really hurts this card is that you can't stop the bleeding from flyers. I mean, yeah, you can gain 4, but even on top of that, like what you're doing, like this card is just too EDH. I think for me, it doesn't really have standard, or I would rather play Elder Gargaroth in other formats, right? For
mm-hmm.
5 mana, or there's another card that we'll get to eventually at 5 mana that I would definitely rather play than this. But I
Sure.
mean, look, it's not legendary. It has a big butt. Five's pretty decent power. It does have 3 abilities that are decent. I mean, destroying an artifact or enchantment's the best one because you can kill the Fable if you cast a creature spell, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time you're playing it, you probably are empty-handed or getting close to, anyways. I mean, how many triggers are you really getting off this, unless your
Right.
deck is really built towards that? And this card costs 5 mana. It's not. It's a 5 mana card. That doesn't win the game, Ham, and it doesn't have anything comes into play.
Yep.
I don't know. There's so many things wrong with this card. I feel like if for a mythic, right? Like,
Yeah. Now, the card is powerful. It is. It has a lot of great stuff going on for it, but I think that you're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. While it is a 5/7 for 5, which is an awesome rate, and it has a like some great abilities. You're right. Being able to just hit naturalize potentially multiple times, even in a single turn, that's awesome. Being able to just ramp yourself up is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, we're already in a situation where we have access to 5 mana one way or another. So the impact on that is kind of, I mean, negligible. And the life gain could be very meaningful. But the most important part is exactly what you're saying. If you tap out on, let's say you ramp a little bit, you tap out on turn 4 to play this. Then you say go. There's no follow up. It doesn't get any of these triggers when it itself enters the battlefield.
yeah, it's
It's
just
only
like
when you cast a
cool.
creature spell once it's on the battlefield.
I have a
So
five
yeah,
seven. Whoop de doo. Like
this is
that's
going to
kind
be
of
a
how it
must kill.
feels.
But like, what happens? I think it's going to be very easy. We're going to see it a lot where you play this out, your opponent bounces it. I'm like, well, cool story, bro. Could you tell me again?
Well,
Because
that
like,
just
it's
feels
what do you do?
bad. Yeah,
It
no
feels
comes
yeah.
into play effect.
Yeah, it doesn't have an
Yeah.
ECP. It doesn't, it doesn't impact the board state when it hits, other than just being a 5/7. And there are just way too many ways to interact with that right now in standard. I don't think, which is a shame because I think you're right. In EDH, this is incredible. If you're in some kind of situation where you can chain off creatures for cheap or for free in some situation, then all of a sudden this becomes really good. Like, so I feel like there might be combos that can leverage this card to really good effect.
You can put in your
But
Ignis deck, Ham. Put in your
I mean,
Ignis deck, get every land out of your deck.
ooh, okay, now we're
Gain
talking.
infinite life.
Bergie Ignis with Silverback Elder. All right, I'm
There
not
you
mad at
go.
that.
Yeah, destroy all the artifacts and enchantments.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. I don't know, but at the end of the day, like You're right. I think this is a
Reach.
big
I just wanted
combo.
Reach Ham. That wasn't
Reach
like
would have
too
been
much
big.
to ask. I think if it
Reach
had
would have been
Reach,
huge.
I think the
Hmm.
playability of that card goes a lot higher because it can
Definitely.
save your ass
Yeah, exactly.
quite a bit of
It can put
times
that
you're about
stop
to
sign
die.
down.
Yep.
Yeah, which you desperately need. Because yeah, you're right. If you're getting beat up by flyers, which let's be honest, we're all going to be getting beat up by flyers pretty frequently. It's just part of the deal. Um, yeah, that's one of the
Yeah.
things that makes Titan of Industry so good. Is well, one, you get the triggers as soon as the ETBs, so that's something. But on top of that, it does have reach. It has reach and trample, so it's good on offense and defense. So that's one of the big things. When
I
it
love that
hits, you
card.
gain a little bit of life, and it's blocking all of a sudden. And that's only 2 more mana, and it's just significantly better than this. So I don't know.
Our next card is one that's going to be pretty interesting here. Urza assembles the Titans. 3 colorless, 2 white, has read ahead. It's a saga. First chapter, scry 4, then reveal top card of your library. If it's a Planeswalker card, reveal this way, put it in your hand. Chapter 2, you can put a Planeswalker card, mana value 6 or less, from your hand onto the battlefield. And the third chapter, you can activate loyalty abilities twice this turn rather than once. Um, Kind of a weird card because you can read ahead and cheat a Planeswalker that costs 6 mana. Potentially as like early as what, turn 3, turn 4 with this card in some
Mm-hmm.
formats. So I think that's really powerful. It has Scry 4, so that could fix your draw. And then if you have an army of Planeswalkers, which, Super Friends could end up being a thing again.
Mm-hmm.
In this standard, I mean, you get to activate your loyalty abilities twice. How do you feel about this card? What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that this is a pretty narrow one. This is one of those, if you're cracking a Dominaria United pack and you crack this, you are either really jazzed because you have a deck, or you're going to be building a deck where you want this. Or you're going to be really bummed out because it doesn't fit anything you've got. It's one or the other. You either have a Super Friends deck and this could absolutely be a part of it, or you don't. So I think a lot of Atraxa players in EDH who are doing the Super Friends build are going to be very happy to see this. When it comes to Standard, we do have a lot of powerful Planeswalkers still in the format. We have Wandering Emperor, we have Elspeth, we have Kaito, we have, I mean, I'm trying to think of some other good ones. I'm still thinking Esper. That's where I feel like I can imagine this fitting. We'll see. There might be some other options that I'm not seeing right off the top of my head. Liliana. Just throwing that out there. Liliana the Veil could fit in here too. I think there are going to be places for it. The other cool thing is being able to, like, if you do read ahead, if you have the big powerful Planeswalker in your hand, you can just read this head to 2. So drop for 5, drop this, play out your Planeswalker, uptick it immediately. You go to chapter 3 the next turn. You can then uptick and then potentially alt, depending on what your Planeswalker is. Like,
That's a really good point.
that seems really good because you
Yep.
do get the uptick plus another follow up on that third chapter. So it does, like, that could really be a big deal. You could get, like, I can absolutely see people getting to Liliana the Veil's ultimate using that third chapter, which is savage. That would hurt a lot of people. And Elspeth has an ultimate as well that is right now kind of out of reach unless you're doing Vorinclex shenanigans, which
Mm-hmm.
won't be on the table anymore in Standard. So I don't know. I think there's something here. I think this card might have a home.
Definitely. Our next card is one that we've actually kind of seen before a bit in Standard, but it's almost like a combination of a couple cards. We have a Haughty Jin, not to be confused with Naughty Jin. So we have a colorless
That's
2
pretty naughty
blue.
though. Just look at him.
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah.
it's looking a little bit naughty here. So star and 4, it's a creature Jin, flying. The power is equal number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, and instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So it's a Goblin Electromancer, and it's also kind of just like a big beefy Jin. I forget the one that was in Standard before. That essentially its power was equal to like the islands you had, but
Mm.
we have had quite a few types of Drakes, essentially in Standard Pass that are kind of like this card. The big difference with this one is that it doesn't say in exile, so you're really relying on just the graveyard here. So if you have ways to get rid of your own cards, or if your opponent exiles your graveyard, then obviously the Haughty Jin is going to be a lot less naughty, and it's just going to be a good old O for. But Overall, I think it is actually a pretty powerful card because it reduces your spells and it can be a big beefy threat on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that this flies is a big deal. Because yeah, it produces a ton of power in the air potentially as you're slinging your spells around. The one key piece, like you're saying, the fact that it cares about the cards in your graveyard is something to keep in mind because one of the other key spell slinger pieces that's out there right now is Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, which is a very powerful card because it lets you basically draw your graveyard. However, every time you cast a spell out of your graveyard with Lear, it does go to exile. So that would reduce Haughty Jin's power. So that's something to keep in mind. Not that that's a bad idea. I'm not saying don't put those in the same deck because Haughty Jin does have that Electromancer ability, like you're saying, of reducing
Mm-hmm.
all instants and sorceries by 1. I mean, that's a big deal. You can get some really good stuff. I mean, all of a sudden, your Lightning Strike becomes a legit Lightning Bolt. That's awesome.
And if you have two
You
of them down, your spells cost even less. So
mm-hmm.
then now your 4 drops only 2. If it had like 2 colorless in its mana cost, I mean,
Yeah,
this card in
it's
multiples gets out of control pretty quickly. I mean, it can get pretty beefy too if you're playing self mill, anything like that. I mean, in older formats, I don't know. Essentially, you might end up having better options than this, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets played specifically for that Goblin Electromancer type effect of
mm-hmm.
making your spells cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, it does. It's a great setup piece. It also can finish the game for you. All 3 mana. Awesome.
Definitely. Next card here on the list is kind of like a card that we've seen in Magic's past, and we've seen some iterations here recently. So we have Evolved Sleeper. It's a black mana for 1/1 human, 1 black. This card becomes a human cleric with base power, toughness 2/2. Black colorless. It becomes a 3/3 Phyrexian human cleric with a death touch counter on it. And then 2 black and a colorless. If it's a Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it, then you draw a card and you lose a life. So essentially, it can get pretty big later in the game, and up front, you actually don't really care if it's too big because it's just mostly going to be a death toucher. So up front, if you're just top decking this and you're trying to cast it, it's a 4 mana. If you want it to be, it's a 2 mana 2/2 and then 4 mana 3/3 with death touch. In the beginning of the game, you can just play it down, and then on turn 2, buff it up to a 2/2. Turn 3, make it a 3/3, and then turn 4, you can already start to draw some cards and kind of be able to attack or block rather well. I think that this card, not to be a bit of a pun here, but this card's kind of a sleeper, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I think the name is very appropriate on this one. Because, yeah, no, I agree. I think the fact that, I mean, it's a 1/1 for 1, fine, whatever. But that's not the point. You pay 1, it becomes a 2/2 again, fine. I mean, at that point, it also becomes a cleric, which might be relevant if you're in some kind of cleric deck. There's the cleric lord we talked about earlier that might be relevant. It's also a human, so if you care about that, something. But yeah, the moment you have invested 4 total mana, it's a 3/3 death toucher. 4 mana is a lot, to be fair, but you get to split it up over multiple turns. So that kind of takes the edge off a little bit. And once you get to the final form, if you will, where it is a Phyrexian, where it kind of wakes up, if you will, then all of a sudden, not only do you have the death touch counter, but you have this mana sink where you can spend 1 black and draw a card, lose a life, and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So throughout the course of the game, if this goes unchecked, I mean, your opponent might be staring down a 6/6, 7/7 if they don't deal with this. So that's kind of cool,
100%.
and so it's one of those things where it is a must answer threat, which is really cool. And that's something that you really like to have in your 1-drops. The problem with it, of course, is that if you've invested a ton of mana in it throughout the course of the game and it gets blown up, that feels pretty bad, but you have drawn cards. So you're still not out completely. If it was 3 mana, just put a counter on it. Well, that would suck, but you're drawing cards, so I think it's worth it. So I
Yeah,
think this
and
is a
it's
decent,
never dead. It has a death
right?
touch counter on it, so I mean, it's always gonna scale
Yeah,
with no
trades
matter
up with
what's in the
anything.
game.
Yep.
Yeah, it trades up with anything. Just definitely one of these cards that you're gonna look at it and you're gonna be like, yeah, whatever. That's a 2/2. Yeah, whatever. It's a 3/3, and then all of a sudden, you've taken a couple hits from it, and then on
Hmm.
top of that, now your opponent's drawing cards. I mean, it gets out of
Yeah.
control. It snowballs eventually, and it only gets better as the game progresses.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. This is that one you look back on and realize, wait a minute, that thing hit me for like 9 damage this game. What?
And
Yeah.
they drew 2 cards.
And they drew 2 cards.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
like, man.
Yeah. Pretty solid.
Yep. Our next card here is one that you're going to see quite a bit in EDH and potentially in Standard. Not sure though, but Timeless Lotus, 5 colorless, legendary artifact, enters the battlefield tapped. You tap it for Wooburg. White, blue, black, red, green mana, so one of each. Hammer, this is just one of the best mana rocks ever.
I love it.
And in Standard, I'm not really sure we're going to be seeing this one that much, right?
Well, I can promise you that this will see play in Standard because I'm at least going to try to force it in Standard, even if nobody else is. Because I think this combines, and this is a combo that if you've been following MTG Twitter, I'm not breaking any news here. This combos beautifully with Teferi, who slows the sunset, because Teferi's +1 allows you to untap it, even the turn it enters the battlefield if Teferi's already there. So that alone, with Timeless Lotus down and Teferi, this gives you double Wooburg. So you could hit somebody with a Door of Nothingness, you know,
That
off
sounds
of
good.
this. Very, very, like, by as early as turn 5, potentially. Like, well, turn 6, maybe. Anyway, like, it's just good. This is very cool. And we have a lot of good 5-color payoffs in the format right now. We have Kami War. We have another card we're going to be talking about later, Joda, that are just awesome 5-color effects that care about having access to all 5 colors. Not to mention, actually, there's also the Courier's Briefcase, being able to pay all 5 to draw cards. Like, that all of a sudden could fit in this deck really nicely, too. Or they could get along nicely. And these are all artifacts. Maybe there's some artifact synergy there. I don't know. But that said, I think this card is really solid. The fact that it costs 5 is a bit of a deterrent, and it's also legendary. That's important to know. But all in all, like,
Yeah, pretty good
I
mana
dig
rock.
it. I dig it. Yeah.
Next card on the list we have Saga, the World Spell. So this one is a green mythic. It is 5 colorless and 2 green. It has read ahead. First 2 abilities, look at the top 7 cards of your library. Reveal non-saga permanent, put it in your hand. The rest go on the bottom randomly. Third ability, though, put up to 2 non-saga permanents from your hand onto the battlefield. So I really like this card. When I first read it, I mean, I still read it and I get really giddy inside, just potentially ramping into this and then just slamming down your 2 Titan Industries that you got in your hand and doing some really crazy stuff. Or maybe you play your Silverback Elder and your
Yeah, maybe
Titan,
that's how you
and
get your Silverback Elder going.
yeah, you do some really cool stuff too. I don't know. I mean, it's a weird card because obviously, like, it costs a lot of mana if you're just really trying to do the first 2 abilities. But the first 2 abilities can also feed into that last ability if you don't have something in your hand. But then maybe if you don't have something in your hand, then you're definitely in some trouble. This is like the Ramper's ramp payoff, where you're like, yeah, I'm going to ramp into this, and then this card's going to get me like the crazy stuff. So I like it a lot because it is, like a cheat creature type of effect into play. I like doing that in green. How do you feel about this card? Like, it's obviously powerful, right?
Oh, 100%. No, the top end. The thing is, this card is both hot and cold. Like, the ceiling on this card is through the roof. What the value you can generate off this card is insane. And with chapters 1 and 2, like, chapter 3 is only going to work if you have really big things in your hand. Because if you're getting a 2-drop and a 3-drop off of this, like, great, you just wasted your 7-drop to get 5 mana worth of stuff in play. That just sucks. But if you're getting 2 7 or 8 drops off of this, holy crap, you're like, that's amazing. In older formats, you hit an Ulamog and an Ugin off of this. Like, you don't get the cast trigger off Ulamog, but oh darn, like, I think you're going to be just fine.
yeah, I think I'm okay with the 10/10
Yeah.
indestructible and a planeswalker that's probably just gonna wrath the board.
Gonna exile the whole board anyway. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like,
right.
And you can do that. You can totally do that.
You can do something
in
like that. 100%.
Explore. You can totally ramp out and just cheat a bunch of card. Maybe you cheat. It's non-saga, but maybe you cheat out some other enchantments that blow everything up, or that blow some creatures up. I mean, yeah, this card just when I read it, it feels so powerful. Like, if you're able to just, for that, the thing is, it's 7 mana, but you and me both know you can get it out on turn 5, turn 6, and then before you know, I mean, if you get this out on turn 5 off of like a fight rigging, and then you're able to slam 2 of the other cards that you can't cheat out into play anymore. Yeah, this card just, feels
if your
busted,
hand,
right?
okay, yeah, I mean, Magical Christmas Land, perfect scenario. If you're in a fight rigging deck, You throw Fight Rigging on turn 3. You hide away World Spell. You then hit Shakedown Heavy on turn 4. Fight Rigging, target Shakedown Heavy, triggers, World Spell enters. If your hand is stacked, you read ahead to chapter 3. You drop a Titan of Industry and a Tox roll. What's your
Yeah, and
opponent going to do?
then you stare at your opponent.
Yeah, it's like, do you want to?
And
Yeah, that's
yeah.
the moment when you're playing across from somebody where it's like, do you want to play this out or are we good? Like,
It's a really powerful card against like mid-range decks, right? Like control decks don't care because they don't really care about creatures. So what you really want to play against like control decks is like planeswalkers,
mhm,
because this card also lets you put like 2 planeswalkers into play.
absolutely.
So I think that it's really like dependent on how you build your deck, and then it's almost a little bit too RNG, depending on what you have in your hand. But I really like it. I know that I can maybe say this, in confidence, saying that you're like a fan of this type of effect where you're cheating stuff
Sure.
out.
Oh yeah, I love it.
So yeah, I mean, I think this card's. I
Yeah,
would love to see it be a player in standard.
yeah. No,
Is
I
how
agree
I
with
feel
that.
about
I
it.
think the biggest issue are going to be those games when you just don't have the payoffs for it. You
Hmm.
know, um, because if it's late in the game, even if you have the mana for it, if you rip this off the top, if you're hellbent and you're dead on board, you throw this down. Chapter 1 triggers. You can draw something, which maybe is the Meat Hook Massacre, or something that you need to help keep you in the game, or maybe the blocker that is. But at the same time, if you can't just cast it, if you're waiting until turn 3 to be able to actually play it out, you're probably going to get blown out. It's probably going to be too late. So it's one of those things. The floor on this card. So when I say like the ceiling is really really high and the floor is also really really low, it's not that when this card hits the battlefield, it's going to be bad for you, because it's probably going to be good regardless if it hits. But there are going to be tons of games where it's dead in your hand, and that sucks. You know, I think that's
100%.
going to be the biggest issue, is it getting stranded in your hand at the end of the game. Like that's key, by the way. If you when it comes to when you're evaluating whether or not a card performed well for you, don't just look at your battlefield. Look at your hand at the end of the game too. If there was a card in there that was a complete dead card the entire game, reconsider having it in the deck. I'm not saying take it out, but just be aware of that. And I think that's where this is going to falter. Is it's going to get stuck in your hand a lot. Yeah.
For sure. Our next card here is actually an interesting one. Another character we haven't seen for a bit. We have Urtai, Resurrected, 2 colorless, blue black for a 3/2 legendary Phyrexian human wizard. It has flash. When it enters the battlefield, you get to choose up to one of these 2 abilities. The first one, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Its controller draws a card, and then destroy another creature, planeswalker. Its controller draws a card. So obviously, both of those effects are really powerful. Being able to counter spell, activated or trigger, and being able to destroy a creature, planeswalker. For me, and card having flash is a really big deal as well. What really detracts me, at least from the card, is your opponent drawing a card.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just don't know. Knowing that there's other cards that have the same type of effect, and I know that I'm not replacing the card and giving my opponent something that could still be detrimental later. I think that's the only thing that I'm not sure about. Um, the card itself, it's obviously really good with Narset. If you have Narset down, then your opponent's not drawing the extra cards.
This is mean.
Right? What do you think about this card?
I love this card. I think it's great. I think this is my favorite counter spell in this set. Possibly my favorite counter spell in standard moving forward. I am very high on this card. Um, it only being a 3/2, frankly, is kind of irrelevant in my opinion. Um, because it is so flexible. And yes, you are giving your opponent a card, which is a little bit of a bummer, but being able to blow up or prevent a very powerful threat. So it does kind of mitigate how you play it. Like Frilled Mystic or the Frilled Snake back in the day, a lot of times, like if my opponent's going to throw like some 3-drop, and I have 4 mana open, I'm just going to throw my Frilled Mystic. Like I'm just going to counter it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to add to my board state. We're just going to rock. With Urtai, maybe I don't. Because yeah, I can prevent this 3-drop from hitting the board, but I might draw them into the land they need to hit to stay on curve next turn, or maybe into a bigger threat that I'm going to deal with later in the game. That said, if my opponent has, for example, World Spell online, and it's about to trigger to chapter 3, I'm gonna throw Urtai and counter that ability all day and give my opponent as many cards as they want. You know, so I think drawing the one card at the right moment is not that big of a downside. But you need to be selective about how you use it. But in the right moment, this thing is going to be an absolute blowout. And the fact that it's a counter spell that can target a spell or an ability, and it can destroy a creature or a planeswalker. I mean, it's the ultimate flexibility. This is like if Frilled Mystic and Drown in the Lock combined to make one legendary creature. This is what you get, and I think it's pretty great.
For sure. Our next card here, we're actually going to talk about a few more cards here before we get to the top 10. We have Shayna, Purifying Blade, green, white,
Mm.
blue, 3/3 lifelink, legendary human warrior. At the beginning of your end step, you can pay X. If you do, draw X cards, and X can't be greater than the amount of life you gain this turn. Um, yeah, actually, you know, I am being more sold on this card the more that I read it and the more that I've seen it.
Okay.
You can potentially draw quite a bit of cards off of it on rate. 3 mana, 3/3 lifelink, sure. Um, and it's in the brokers, which do have some powerful cards that we haven't seen get played yet in standard. What do you think of old Shayna here?
I mean, possibly the three most beautiful words in all of Magic: draw X cards. What more do you want? I mean, yeah, I know there's some limitations around it, but at the end of the day, being able to just draw multiple cards relatively easily in these colors, I think is fantastic. And she's a human, and she's got lifelink. I mean, I think this card's great. I think this card is just absolutely great. She's also a warrior, which usually when you see that creature type, it more aligns with like a Boros kind of stuff. But there are some equipment warrior synergies in some older formats that you might be able to pull off in Ban. I don't know. It don't or actually in party decks. That's something to keep in mind. If you're again in older formats and parties are relevant mechanic. So I mean, I think Shane's got a lot going for her. I think this card is just going to be really solid because in any kind of Bant aggro deck, being able to refill your hand just for the low price of attacking, and we have a lot of other life linkers in the set too that I think could fit in that deck really well.
100%. Next card here, Raven Man.
Mm.
Colorless and a black for legendary creature human wizard. It's a 2/1. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card, you can create a 1/1 black creature token that can't block. It does have flying though. And then 3 colorless and a black. Each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. So up front, it's kind of like a young pyromancer type card. And then the second ability, you're not really going to be using too often, but still can end up being relevant, honestly, depending on how many cards your opponent hands, and you're really trying to whittle them down and get potentially relevant threat on the battlefield. Yeah, I mean, this into Liliana feels pretty good.
Oh my goodness, yes.
A lot of different plays with Raven Man. What are you thinking for this one?
Totally. I think this one is rock solid. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I don't know if the card is amazing, but you're absolutely right. In the control deck that is monkeying with your opponent's hand, this has an opportunity to be really savage. Additionally, any format where cycling is a thing or channeling is a thing, which we have at standard right now with Besijo, Iganjo, all that jazz. This we will that those will trigger Raven Man. So that's pretty cool. I think, I genuinely think that this card is going to have a home, and you're right. I mean, this actually is a great curve with Liliana because turn 2 Raven Man, turn 3 Liliana, uptick, everybody discards a card. Hopefully, you're discarding something that you don't mind, and your opponent is discarding something that they do mind losing. Um, and then on turn 4, if you don't have anything to play, well, you could blitz the Tenacious Underdog you discarded last turn, or you could pay for it, tap, and force your opponent to discard an additional card. So if you have whittled them down, especially if you want to be a jerk and your opponent has to take a mulligan, that's a great opportunity to just put the hammer down and really just restrict their access to any action. And in the process, you're creating those birds. I mean, yeah, it's just a great way to. I mean, hand hate is good enough on its own. And so to get additional power on the board with flying because you're hating on your opponent's hand, awesome. We also have another, I believe it's a common in the set in Pilfer, which is just Fair Thoughtseize. It's 1 and a black for a Thoughtseize style effect at sorcery.
Yep, yep.
It's just good. And like that can fit that deck beautifully as well. Just tinker with your opponent's hand. Um, don't let him play the game. You know, that's what Raven Man's all about. I like it.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a good card.
The next card here, we have Land of War Green Widow, 2 colorless green, 4/3, reach, trample, spider. Domain, 7 colorless green, return this card from the graveyard to the battlefield tap. It gains if it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting anywhere else. It costs 1 less for each basic land type. Among land types you control, just a good beefy threat. It has trample, it has reach, good on rate, 3 mana, 3 mana, 4/3. And on top of that, if you have domain, just 1 triumph makes the ability cost 3 less, so then it's just 4 mana to get it back later in the game. And it doesn't have that. You can only do it at sorcery clause, so you can actually do this at end step and then be able to start attacking with it on the following turn. Hammer, any additional thoughts on this card?
Yeah, I mean, we got reach, trample, 4/3/3. Great. Look, it's great on rate. It does all the things you want. Again, good on defense, good on offense, and the thing has freaking flashback. Like you put
Yeah.
you put a flashback on a creature, I'm in. Like let's go.
Yeah,
So
and
I
especially
dig
if
it.
it's like I said, if you have this like even in a 4-color deck, this card's pretty phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely.
I have another card here that I want to talk about just real quick. A couple more actually. So we have Herd
Okay.
Migration, 6 colorless and a green, sorcery, domain, create a 3/3 green beast for each basic land type and land types you control, and then you can also pay a green and a colorless to discard it. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle, gain 3. So hey, this and Raven Man could be pretty good. On top of that,
Very true.
what I really like about this card is you're probably not always going to want to play 4 of this, but let's say you play a couple of it to kind of help smooth your hand out. Make sure you're not missing land drops. Got your right basic land types for your domain, and on top of that, you get to gain some life. And then later on, if you draw it and you have a lot of mana, this is pretty much kind of like a mascot exhibition. I know we talked about this originally when the card got spoiled, but I mean, it kind of feels like a card that's almost like never dead, right? Like it's good early, it's good later. If you end up losing to 3/3/3s, don't feel ashamed, because I already told you might.
Right. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, this almost feels like, Wizards knew that lessons were going to be rotating out. And so they gave us a card that was the 2 lessons we all played anyway, put together. Yeah, this is environmental sciences or mascot exhibition. What do you need? There you go. I dig it. I think it's just this is a good utility piece. This card is not going to set any worlds on fire. This isn't going to be a deck that like wins the Pro Tour. We're not going to be freaking out about the amazing plays with Herb Migration. However,
If it
this is
does
that
win it, I'm gonna remind HamHocks that he
somebody
called
clip
it.
this and quote me on
Yep.
it. Yeah, exactly. When yeah, when
When Herd
yeah,
Migration takes down the
when
Pro
Andre
Tour.
Strosky swings for lethal with all with all his 3/3 green beast tokens to win next year's world championship. Yes, feel free to yeah, you can quote this. But this is one of those cards that is just a solid role player that is going to be doing a lot of good stuff. And you're right, it's never dead. It's good early, it's good late. If you're in multicolored decks, if you're in a 5-color deck, this just gives you some potential fixing and a little bit of life gain, because those early turns, your lands are going to be entering tapped or pinging you for the colored mana that you need to get your stuff down with the pain lands. So a little bit of life gain goes a long way in keeping you alive, especially against aggro decks, while you're setting up what could be maybe a clunky mana base. And this can help you with that. And like you're saying, if it's late in the game and you can get 5 3/3 beast tokens, that's an instant board your opponent has to deal with. So
Oh yeah,
pretty cool.
definitely.
Yeah.
Our last card before we get to the top 8 here, Shivan Devastator. So this is a card that I think in the beginning it was pretty polarizing on whether or not it's good, but I actually think that Gold Span at home, that actually only gets better as the game progresses, quote unquote, in terms of its power and toughness. So Shivan Devastator, X and a red flying haste. It's a dragon hydra. When it enters the battlefield, it comes in with X +1/+1 counters on it. So essentially, it's like the ultimate fireball type effect. It's a mythic rare. It can grow bigger than a gold span, but it's good at any stage in the game. I mean, if you want to play it on turn 2 and then grow it, it's great. 3 mana 2/2 Windrake with haste, so on and so forth. I mean, this card scales with the game, and there isn't just a particular home for this card. This card could end up being in a lot of different decks, and on top of that, I mean, maybe you just sideboard it in and kind of beat your opponent out of nowhere, and they weren't expecting it, right?
Oh, totally. The flexibility of this card can't really be overstated because, yeah, like red aggro decks will probably want two of these because they might just be that, that fireball effect. It might just be like, I just need to deal 4 damage. Hey, this is 4 damage with haste and flying. Great.
Hmm.
Bam. Like, so it gives you that. It gives you that ability to just blaze your opponent's face real quick. Great. In ramp decks, this has an opportunity to be, if you're in like Gruul or Teamer, some kind of deck where your goal is to like go big and go, over the top. This could be like an out of nowhere OTK, because if you've got just a ton of mana lying around, if you're doing the Teferi, Lotus situation or whatever the case may be, this thing has an opportunity to enter the battlefield with like, I don't know, 12, 15, 20 counters on it out of nowhere and just end it, which is awesome. Like weird combo finish or early aggro finish. Either way, it gives you what you want. Also, if you just need a blocker on board, like that's a mode of this card that you get. You can dump your mana into just making a creature that's a 4/4 or 5/5, whatever size it needs to be, to tangle with what's coming in. And then as you're using your other mana to do whatever the rest of your game plan is. I mean, this card's great. Like it just fits whatever you need in whatever moment. And it's also a super simple design. That's one of the things I really like about it. It's just very straightforward. Also, it's a dragon and a hydra, which are two relevant creature types. So any kind of dragon synergies, of which there are quite a few out there,
Hmm.
this is great. So I dig it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a super solid card overall. I
Mhm.
definitely expect to see it somewhere.
Right.
Like you said, it's not even like a card that you're probably going to see four of in a deck, but
No, probably not.
you're going to fear it. You're going to fear it
Yes.
just like you fear Gold Spam because listen, even if you're not getting some treasures, I mean, 4/4 flyer haste, that's pretty good. It's a
Yeah.
clock.
Oh, it's this is going to be the card when you're going up against aggro when you're like, okay, as long as they don't top deck this, I'm going to be okay. This is it. As long as they don't top deck Devastator, I'm going to be fine. And we're going to have those games where they do and it's over. you know,
Yeah,
this is
hold
it.
on to that instant speed removal for that one.
Big time. Yeah.
Alrighty, so Ham, listen, we talked about almost all the rares and mythics
There's
from the
so many
set,
there's so many great
except
cards in
our
this set.
top 10.
All
So we're
right.
gonna get to the cards that we care about the most. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Number 10, we have Rith, Liberated Primeval. So Rith is going to be two colorless, white, red, green, for a 5/5 legendary creature dragon. It has flying and it also has ward 2. Other dragons you also control have ward 2. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature or planeswalker an opponent controlled was dealt excess damage this turn, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So, 5 mana, 5 flying ward. I already like it. It's in a
Mhm.
weird color combination that you wouldn't normally see that. It gives
Mhm.
your other dragons ward too. So hey, Shivan Devastator we just mentioned, gonna be a little bit harder to kill now. And on top of that, let's say that your opponent is in block mode, and this is just so the wording on this specifically. If a creature or planeswalker an opponent control was dealt excess damage, so this doesn't even have to be in combat.
No.
You can deal some damage to one of your opponent's creatures. That card dies, and then now you have another 4/4 that has ward
Mhm.
2. I just feel like this card is really, really strong. I mean, I think what's really understated uh, about Magic sometimes is the fact that most removal is equipped to be efficient. So you're really trying to get rid of maybe some threats earlier in the game rather than later to kind of help save yourself, knowing that maybe some of those smaller threats, nowadays, have like 3 or 4 keyword abilities, so they do all these crazy things. But a card like Rith essentially comes down and automatically some of the removal isn't always going to line up with it. And then on top of that, it has Ward 2. So now the removal that would line up with it essentially is going to take a whole turn from your opponent just to be able to get it out of the way. And then on top of that, essentially this is the type of the card that if you don't kill it, it does end up running away with the game as, 4/4 dragons with flying. I mean, let's be honest, that's pretty big, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think the key to this card and the key to the success here is going to be how easy is it to deal excess damage. That's going to be clutch. And there are some big burn spells out there we have. I mean, it would be the mana might be tricky because it's a Jund card, but I mean, even then we have 2 overlaps. So, but Unleash the Inferno is a card that deals 7 damage for 4. And then excess damage that's dealt can help you destroy artifacts or enchantments. That can, in this case with Rith, also create additional dragons for you. So that's pretty sweet. Definitely like that. We also have Lightning Strike and Strangle in the format, so you can strangle a 1/1. All of a sudden, boom, you got another dragon. Sweet.
This
You
card
know
could
that.
go off pretty quick, huh?
Yeah, it's not hard. It's not hard. And again, like you're saying, if your opponent's in block mode or they have planeswalkers, if you attack a planeswalker that's low on loyalty with Rith or another dragon that you have lying around, their choices are chump block it potentially and you deal excess damage to the creature, you get your dragon, or they don't, you hit the planeswalker, you deal excess damage to the planeswalker, you get your token. Great. Like, I mean, barring combat shenanigans or big blockers, you're gonna be fine. So I think Rith has a lot of cool opportunities. And like your other point was well taken there. It's a 5/5 flying War 2 dragon for 5. I mean, that's a
What's
body that you need
yeah?
to contend with
What
immediately,
else do you need to hear after that, right? I
right?
mean, just by itself, I mean that's pretty good stats,
Yeah.
if I do
Well,
say
and like
so
I'm saying,
myself. Like,
if you have Strangle in your deck and your opponent has tokens down, or some creature with toughness less than 3, for 6 mana, you hit Rith and then a Strangle. Go to your end step, you get a 4/4 red dragon, both of which have ward. You just, for 6 mana, removed one of your opponent's things and put 9 power worth, a 9/9 power worth of bodies on the board, all with flying. I mean, and that's not asking too much. Don't get me wrong. I love my magical Christmas land scenarios, but that one doesn't seem that far out of reach.
these are like normal plays. I mean, like the thing
Hmm.
is you know, I'm gonna make a comparison that's not exactly the same type thing you're doing, but it's like Kalidas, where you
Hmm.
play this card and you just play any of your 1 mana removal spells. Then all of a sudden it's like, wow, now I just have not. You're right. For 6 mana, Strangle specifically as the example,
Hmm.
you're getting 9 power on board. 9 power that has across 2 bodies, each have ward 2. Like that's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, and they're also 1 mana fight spells, in the format too, like Tail Swipe, for example. Like, that would be very easy to pull off, and that can deal 5 damage
Yeah, good
potentially
point. Yeah,
with Rift
fight
down.
spells are good with this. Yep.
Fight spells are great here. So we got fight spells, we got burn spells. I mean, yeah, you could do some like this could get yeah, you're absolutely right. Your opponent has to deal with this immediately, and it has ward, so they have to dance with that too, or it's gonna get out of hand really fast.
100%.
Hmm.
Our next card here on the list. So Rith, Liberated Primeval. Be on the lookout for it. Pretty strong mythic. Next card on the list is a card that we think that you're going to actually see quite often in all types of formats.
Hmm.
We have Plaza of Heroes. So we have a land. It's a non-basic land. It comes into play untapped. You can tap it for colorless, or you can add 1 mana of any color, spend it only to cast a legendary spell. Add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control, or pay 3, tap it. Target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until on a turn. You do have to exile the Plaza though. So, Ham, just like the Painlands and the Thran Portal, the number one thing about this card is it comes
Untapped.
into play untapped.
Let's go. I love it.
Um, yeah, I mean, this card could end up doing quite a lot of shenanigans, let's be honest
Oh yeah.
here.
Oh, 100%. This card's phenomenal. I mean, obviously, the most obvious place for it is Commander. Like, if you're playing Commander, unless you're playing monocolor. If you're playing a monocolor Commander, it's kind of meh. But if your Commander has multiple colors in it, this card is amazing. Just put it in the deck. I heard some people saying, like, well, how many decks do I have? Well, that's how many copies of Plaza of Heroes I need to go get. Because it just, you can, no matter what the board state is, you can tap this for any color of mana to cast your commander. And then once the commander is in play, because it will be a legendary permanent or legendary creature in many situations, potentially planeswalker in some, but then all of a sudden, Plaza of Heroes can tap for whatever color is in that commander's color identity. So the floor on this in Commander is it's an additional command tower. That's pretty awesome. But then on top of that, it has that protection ability for 3 mana and then tapping it. So effectively 4 mana, you get a Tameo safekeeping style effect, which is awesome. Having that on board, locked and loaded, ready to go at a moment's notice is really good. Having utility pieces like this in your mana base is awesome. Now, obviously, I'm talking about Commander for some of this. As far as Standard goes, there are a ton of legendary things that you can be doing. Like a
Kami War.
lot of yeah,
Kami
they're
War.
everywhere.
Let's just mention that one first off, right? That's the one that pops in my head when I read this. I'm like, man, you're telling me I get to cast my like this land isn't legendary.
Right? It's so good. No, this is one of those, like, when you look at this, if you think, huh, that I think that's okay. No, your estimation is not high enough. This card is excellent. It's going to be awesome in most decks. Not every deck. That's not a go-to slam in every standard deck. But if you have a lot of legendaries, if you have planeswalkers, if you have legendary creatures, which you will have, Dominaria United is a Legends Matter set. And on top of that, just looking at design over the last 5-10 years, the number of legendary creatures per set has grown. It just has. And I think a part of that is Commander. Like, obviously, like, we've reached a point where if a card has a cool, unique ability, Wizards does have an incentive to make that creature legendary so that it could potentially be someone's commander. That adds an extra level of value to it. So I get that. It makes sense. But as a result, we've seen a lot more legends. So Plaza of Heroes has more stuff that it can cast easily. But even then, it's still adding one colorless mana no matter what.
Or
And
if
again,
you happen
untapped.
to have a legendary down, then it's gonna add a colored mana. I mean,
exactly.
It's.
And yeah,
I think it's
you're
really
gonna have
good.
legendaries down. You're gonna have legendaries down.
I think this
You
is
just will.
definitely like one of the better, on top of already the good land cycle and the Thran portal that we got. I think Plaza Heroes is the type of card that helps enable a lot of different strategies. I mean, you don't even have to be playing a 5-color deck. You can be playing like,
No.
let's say you want to play like your legendary human deck. This card casts Thalia, and then when you have Thalia
Right?
down, it adds white mana. Like, and then on top of that, maybe you want to protect your Adeline. These are all just examples of an aggressive deck. We've been talking about these big over the top commander decks, some of these mid range decks, maybe. And here I am. I'm like, you can even just play this in your beatdown deck. This card's great, right? Like,
Right.
you play it in your squee deck. You know, cast your squee.
Totally.
Now your squee lets it tap for red. I mean, your planeswalkers, whatever, right? Like,
you just played it out perfectly there. Like, imagine if you are doing some kind of weird 5-color nonsense deck with some kind of weird situation going. You could play out like freaking Xander's Lounge as your turn 1 play. Plaza of Heroes on 2, you can cast Thalia.
yeah.
Like,
and then your opponent's like, what the heck is going
happening?
on?
Yeah, exactly.
5-color taxes?
Yeah,
like, what?
so those legendary spells, this is just perfect for you. It just gives you whatever color you need to cast a legendary anything. You know? Yeah, well, I mean, you could play out a Thalia there and then potentially follow it up with like a Meat Hook Massacre. Like, you can do all kinds of weird stuff because there's a ton of stuff that's legendary, incidentally. You know? And it's not just creatures either. Like, there's a lot of legendary enchantments, legendary artifacts. Like, granted, the artifacts you generally don't need colored mana, but
it's one of those cards that I want higher on the list. But there's so many good cards.
There's so many good cards in this set. This
This
set is like bangers top to bottom.
Good.
It's
yeah, there's a lot of good cards in this set. I just think that this is a land that we're gonna look back on and be like, yeah, wow, that definitely without this land, that deck wouldn't have existed.
Oh yeah, they're
not legendary Ham. You can play 2 and then just have perfect 5-color mana already on like turn 2 with know whatever. As 100%. Long as you're playing legendary cards. I mean, there's so much upside to having legendaries in your deck with this set that we haven't seen since the last time that we were on Dominaria, and I actually feel like it's honestly done better in this set. Like play your historic spells or whatever it was called was like a cool ability, but cards like Plaza Heroes and there's a few other Legendaries Matters cards, like some artifacts and stuff that we'll get into in one of our other videos, but I think Plaza Heroes just A+. Just an A+ land that
card's great.
You're going to see in a lot of different decks. Next card here, we actually have a colorless card to artifact. So we have Weatherlight completed. So it's 2 colorless for a legendary artifact vehicle. It has flying. It's a 5/5. As long as it has 4 or more friction counters on it. As long as it has 4 or more friction counters on it, it's a friction creature in addition to its other's type. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a Phrasis, sorry if I say this wrong, counter
All good.
on this card, then draw a card. If it has 7 or more. If not, then scry 1. So, Weatherlight completed. It costs 2 mana. The stats on it are obviously great. The only thing with it is that you obviously need to have some cards that go to the graveyard, but in sacrifice decks, that's not going to be a problem. And if you're bringing this in from the sideboard against, let's say, board wipe type strategies that destroy all creatures, then this card is going to be phenomenal because if they board wipe, this card just becomes active.
Mm-hmm.
And then your opponent's essentially staring down a 5/5 flyer. And then on top of that, let's say some of your other creatures die and they don't kill this, then you're going to potentially either be drawing cards, and in between that, you're going to get a ton of scries to potentially hit another card that you
Mm-hmm.
need, right? Yeah, I think that there is a lot of potential for this card to be powerful.
Oh yeah, I love this card. I mean, the obvious application, like you're saying, is sack decks. If you are regularly sacrificing creatures, get this in the deck. Do not pass go. Just do it, because you're going to be, for every creature that dies, you get a scry at the very least. Once you get to 7, you're going to be straight up drawing cards every time something dies. And unlike another card that has a similar effect in Morbid Opportunist, this can trigger multiple times a turn. That's awesome. Um, the other part about that is, like you're saying, board wipes. Weatherlight completed and board wipes, oh, it is so much fun. Because what ends up happening is, like, this is a great way to break a board stall, believe it or not. If you're at a point where you and your opponent are just kind of like, you both have decent boards, you both have creatures online, you're linking at 5, 6, 7 bodies on the board, no real good attacks, and you're both just kind of looking at each other, waiting for somebody to make the first move. If you have Weatherlight completed on board, do not be afraid to rip the drag to the bottom, or the depopulate, or the meat hook massacre, whatever your board wipe du jour is. Hit it and see what happens, because it's a lot of fun. When the whole board sweeps, what will happen is, you get, for every single creature on your board, you get a trigger on Weatherlight completed. The first trigger, you scry. If you don't like the card, bottom it, don't even hesitate. You're then going to get another scry, then another scry, then another scry. Then all of a sudden, Weatherlight becomes a creature. Then you get another couple scries. Then you start drawing cards. So, and if this is later in the game, you might be even just straight up drawing cards. You might draw 3, 4 cards because you wiped the board, and you've got a 5/5 flyer online now that your opponent doesn't have. Like, and now it's clear skies ahead, and Weatherlight completed can crash in, unabated. It's awesome. And don't I think the biggest key is those scries. It is easy to look at a scry 1 trigger and shrug it off and just assume, like, it's not really that great, is it? But when you get like 3 of them in a row, that makes a big difference. That gives you an opportunity to really dig for what you're looking for. Um, and it's scrying is really valuable, and this gives you that in spades. So this is one of those cards that, yes, you put it in the sack decks, but it's also worth putting in decks, I think, that have a lot of creatures, because sometimes your creatures just die, even if you're not killing them. They die in combat. This gives you a little extra bonus. They die in, your opponent wipes the board, because if they don't, they're gonna die. This all of a sudden buffs everything up, and in that situation, because they ripped the board wipe, you can attack with it right away as soon as you go back to your turn. So I love this card. I think the design on it is really
Yep.
strong. It fits a lot of situations really, really nicely. It's just solid. And on top of that, like, it's a weird design, and I love that. It's a vehicle, but it doesn't have a crew cost.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's neat.
We don't see that too often.
Hmm.
What I really like about it is how efficient it is. It's only 2 mana and it's colorless, so it can go fit into a lot of different strategies. Just like you said, it can go into sack decks, or maybe you just play it as insurance against like a control
Hmm.
deck, just because it's just 2 mana and it's colorless. But Weatherlight completed, I think that up front, I know there's a lot of chatter on it not being it maybe as powerful as it seemed at first, but I actually think that maybe we're not seeing in the right deck yet. It
Maybe.
definitely has like that Ob Nixilis type feeling where Ob Nixilis was very powerful, but maybe we didn't have a deck for it yet. And in all
Hmm.
honesty, Weatherlight kind of fits into the same deck, which is the sacrifice deck, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we might absolutely see. I can imagine a Rakdos sacrifice deck, even in standard, running maybe Oni Called Anvil, definitely Obnixilis. your tenacious underdogs. There's a new skeleton that actually might fit in that deck nicely as well.
Yep.
And then we've got Lagomos, the Rakdos cleric that produces a 2/1 every turn that you can sacrifice to get
Oh,
effect too. So I feel like the pieces are there for there to be some kind of special. Oh, and we're also getting bone splinters back in standard too. So I think a lot of the pieces are there for that deck to possibly come together, and whether like completed could just be the piece that ties it all together.
100%. Next card on the list. Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief, green blue for a 2/1 legendary creature fairy rogue flying. Whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than this card, you can copy that spell. The copy targets Ivy. So this is an interesting card because up front you think maybe it's not that strong, but this card gets out of control extremely quickly, right, HamHocks?
Oh yeah. No, this card's awesome. I mean, your auras, your mutates, any combat tricks that you have, any instance of sorceries that target, all of a sudden they're all live and online in multiples. Yeah, this card is awesome. I love it. I also love to copy it alongside what is it, the Vesuvian Duplimancy, the card that when you target your stuff, you get additional copies of stuff. Because if you can make 3 or 4 Ivies and then target one of them or one of your other creatures with an effect or with a spell, all of a sudden you get copies of that spell for every Ivy you have, which could be really cool. And it works really nicely alongside effects that maybe like there's certain cards that aren't great already. Like one that actually works really nicely with Ivy that I had fun with was Sheltered Boughs, which is an enchantment that is very forgettable. It gives the enchanted creature +1/+3 for 3, 2 and a green. Terrible card, right? Except it has, okay, possibly the 3 best words in all of Magic. Draw a card on it. So the moment you cast that on one of your other creatures, you then copy it again, target that on Ivy, draw 2 cards and you get a little stat boost. Is it amazing? Not necessarily. Is it fun? You better believe it. So, and if you have multiple Ivies, like I'm saying with Duplimancy, then all of a sudden it can snowball out of control really fast. So, card's great. Card's fun. You can also do neat things with. There are a lot of other aura synergies right now. You've got Light Paws. There's another card actually in the set. There's a new Danitha as well that cares about auras that can do some crazy stuff. So Bant aura decks with Ivy, very strong. I think Simic or Sultai mutation decks in older formats with Ivy have a chance to get, frankly, absurd. Um, so I think the value snowball with this card is awesome. Like if this is one of those, if you see it on your opponent's side and you have removal, use it. Just get that thing out of there because it's going to get out of hand really fast.
Definitely good on offense and really good on defense. I mean, it's like a spell skite type of
Mm-hmm.
effect where you can just play it down if you want to protect your other cards from a removal spell, anything like that. I think that Ivy overall, I think it's just like it's really really powerful.
Oh yeah,
It does quite a lot. Like you said, like just copying all your auras, copying your targeted spells, that pump up your creatures, anything like that. I think that Ivy is just going to be a really, really powerful card overall, and expect to see it in a lot of like. I'm not sure what deck wants it right now because we're so used to aura decks
mm-hmm.
being white or blue white.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that just reading the card, there's got to be some shenanigans somewhere with it.
Totally.
Um, so expect to see this be a player somewhere in standard.
Yeah. The other thing I want to point out, it says whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy, if your opponent has a combat trick, if you go to block with Ivy on whatever their attacker is coming in, and they have a combat trick targeting their creature, you can copy it and target Ivy.
Mm-hmm.
So if they hit it with a giant growth, it gets +3/+3. Guess what? Ivy grows too. Like that's pretty awesome.
Yep.
That said, if they hit one of your other creatures with a kill spell, if you're on arena, it will ask, "Do you want to copy?" Decline. You do
Yeah.
not.
You don't have to choose the Ivy to die
You
because you
don't
don't
have
want it
to.
to. Yeah, you don't want to
Yeah.
get 2 for 1.
So be
Um,
careful about that. But
yep.
but at the same time, your opponent's spells can copy on Ivy too. Really powerful stuff. And in Commander, this is just off the rails, right? This like, yeah.
Yeah, a card can get out of control very, very
Mm-hmm.
quickly. So our next card here on the list is actually another Planeswalker. Um, I actually like this card quite a lot, specifically for aggressive decks. So we have Jaya, Fiery Negotiator, 2 colorless, 2 red, legendary Planeswalker Jaya, comes in with 4 loyalty. +1, create a 1/1 red monk creature token with prowess. -1, exile top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. You may play that card this turn. -2, choose target creature an opponent controls. Whenever you attack this turn, this card deals damage equal to the number of attacking creatures to that creature. -8, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a red or instant sorcery spell, you get to copy it twice. You may choose new targets for the copies. So the first ability on this essentially makes a 1/1 red monk with prowess. I think that that's like a bit underrated. We all know prowess can be really, really strong.
Mm-hmm.
The first -1 essentially is like a card advantage, kind of just like Chandra Torture Defiance. -2 is maybe a little bit too situational of removal, but if you're playing this in an aggressive deck, then it's going to be really good. And then the -8 emblem, obviously, most of the time you don't judge planeswalkers on emblems, but it's essentially kind of like a game-ending emblem if you have like lightning strikes, anything like that in your deck, direct damage. Overall, I'm a really big fan of this card. I think that it gets played uh, in a lot of different decks. You can play it in your control deck and make some monks that essentially can chump block early, and then later in the game, you can maybe chain a couple spells and start to beat your opponent down if you've gone wide with them. And then on top of that, it gives you additional card advantage. And your mid-range strategy is kind of like the same type of idea, where essentially you get some card advantage more from that second ability and still have a potential threat that can be lethal. And then in aggressive decks, this card definitely shines where it continually can keep going wide. It has high enough loyalty to potentially survive an attack or two. And then on top of that, once again, you get some card advantage and that damage ability. That -2 gets a lot more relevant if you are playing in an aggressive deck, where you can kind of just play this down tick, kill something your opponent has, and then keep the beats going. Then essentially go wide. So by itself, it's a really good engine, and with support, it gets even better. What do you think about this card?
I mean, this is what a planeswalker ought to look like. This is like the perfect template for a planeswalker. Like what does a planeswalker do? Well, you should probably have an uptick that gives you some kind of value that's decent turn after turn. Check, got it. Should protect itself too. Got that. And then you probably have a negative ability that maybe gives you some kind of card advantage or remove something. Well, we got both of those here. And then you want it to ramp up to some kind of ultimate that could be backbreaking in the right deck if you were to get to it. Boom, we got that too. So this is one of those cards. When I first read it, I remember thinking these are all fine, but it's a 4-mana planeswalker. Do I want that in my aggressive red decks? The more I look at it, the more I like it. To be honest, I think this card is going to have a home. This is going to be difficult to deal with once it's on the board. The fact that it does protect itself with those monk tokens. I mean, there are going to be plenty of times when Jaya upticks, you create the monk, they attack into Jaya, you block with the monk. That's it. And you've accomplished negating an attack and buffing up Jaya 1. Great. There's nothing wrong with that. But just like you're saying, that -2, if you're in a go wide deck, and there are a lot of good, cheap, hasty threats in red right now. So it would not be hard to be able to hit that -2, even on turn 4 for 3 pretty consistently, and potentially knock out, some pretty significant creatures on your opponent's side of the board, like right away, if it was relevant on that board state. And if it's not, you can just grow your team.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Like you can go
really solid.
wide with in your mid-range
Hmm.
control type deck. I mean, you're just already probably playing some creature destruction, some thought seizes, anything like that. I mean, yeah, this card just makes sure that your spells aren't dead later, and on top of that, it
Hmm.
keeps drawing. Obviously, it's not Shine Torture Defiance, but I think that you could play it with it maybe. Uh, I just feel like Jaya has a lot of applications. It's doing a lot.
Hmm.
Specifically in standard, I expect to see this card somewhere,
Definitely.
guaranteed. In older formats, we'll see. Like I said, it's not as good as Chandra, but it could be good alongside of it.
Totally.
So next card here on the list. So we're starting to hit essentially our top five. So top five, let's go. We got Leyline Binding. So one of the best removal spells we've seen in a very long time.
Hmm.
So 5 colorless and a white enchantment. Flash. It has domain. It costs 1 less for each basic land type among lands you control. When it enters the battlefield, exile any non-land permanent an opponent controls until this card leaves the battlefield. So, if you have a Triumph down, Essentially, it's an Oblivion Ring at instant speed. If you have an additional basic land that it only costs 2, and Ham, if you have all 5 of the basic land types down, then you're looking at this card only costing 1 white mana at flash, and it gets rid of anything in play that's not a land. I expect to see this card in its existence in standard, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. Like, yeah, no, that, I mean, the idea of getting an instant speed like banishing light or oblivion effect potentially for 1 is insane. The fact that this is completely unrestricted. It can exile any non-land permanent. It's not any non-land permanent with mana value 4 or less, or any creature or planeswalker. It's anything. Like whatever you want to go after, as long as it's not a land, boom, this thing can hit it. We are already seeing plenty of decks that are running Borrowed Time, which is effectively a reprint of Banishing Light. Where it's 2 and white at sorcery speed for exile a non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield. So, and like you're saying, 1 Triome, you already got that with this. And let's be honest, we're all running Triomes right now. Like, and we're going to continue to do so for some time. So if you're in a 3-color deck, that's all you need for this card to be really solid. 3-color deck with white in it somewhere. Boom. If you're in 5-color, get out of town. This thing's amazing. Like, yeah, it gets like, I think we are going to see this absolutely in standard, no question. And this is one of those, when I look at it, I wouldn't be surprised if it does see play in some decks in even older formats. Like, sometimes
Oh,
you
in
can look at a
modern, this
card.
card's nuts, right? Like
Yeah,
you're already playing Prismatic Ending, and
right.
Prismatic Ending is a sorcery. So, you're not always able to do that, quote unquote, when you want to all the time. I'm just gonna actually double check this here because
Yeah, let me actually. And
I don't
I
want to be
actually am
wrong on
not a
that
modern
one.
player myself, so I.
Um, so yeah,
But
it is a sorcery. Yep. So you're kind of restricted by only being able to do that on your turn. And on top of that, a thing that is relevant in modern is whether or not you can cascade into it. So the best thing
mm,
about Leyline Binding is you can play it in these 4 or 5 color decks. And let's say you want to play like a cascade type strategy, you're actually not hurting yourself because you're never going to hit the binding. So you can still play
right.
it and still kill things and not worry about messing up your combo. Um, yeah, I mean, in modern you're going to be playing this card for 1 white.
Yeah.
In Explorer, there's chances you're going to be playing it for 2 or even 1 in your Nib Mizzet, Omnath type of strategy deck, your 4-color Kami War deck, whatever you want to do. I think we're going to be seeing this card a lot, and we're going to be seeing it. There's going to be times where you see it a lot, and there's going to be times where you're not seeing as much because people are ready for it. So it's
Sure.
definitely one of those removal spells that, yeah, just catch all.
Hmm.
It has flexibility. Sometimes you want all 4 in your deck. Sometimes you play a couple main, couple side, and as we all know, I mean, the more colors you play in Magic, the better advantage you have. Essentially, in what your options are, and Leyline Binding being a fantastic option to pretty much kill anything is just, yeah, really really good.
Did this thing need flash? Honestly.
I think it did. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that's what really pushes it, right? Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
Our next card
Great stuff.
here, yeah, definitely an awesome card. Next card here on the list is actually one of the ones that we actually got to see spelled early. Um, we got Shieldred the Apocalypse, 2 colorless, 2 black, legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, Death Touch. It's a 4/5. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Hammer, this card is really good on rate. It's a 4 mana
Hmm.
4/5 with Death Touch. And on top of that, it essentially has an ability that keeps going on as the game continues. You don't really have to do too much. It can be a win condition by itself,
Hmm.
and it trades up, trades with anything, and then it beats down rather well. What's your opinion on this card? I mean, we got it here at number 4, pretty
Yeah.
high up there.
I'm very high on this card, and this is one of those that going into, like, I don't know, I wasn't so sure. I knew, like, okay, in Commander this thing's insane because people love drawing cards in Commander, and there are tons of card draw spells because in many casual Commander pods for the first couple of turns, people are just playing lands and casting spells a lot of the time, just drawing cards. So obviously, if you can get her down early in that situation, sure. But I was thinking in standard, I wasn't really seeing a home for it. However, it is an immediate must answer threat. That's one of the keys because, like, this card punishes your opponent just for trying to dig for an answer for her. Like, that is insane to me. If your opponent has some way to draw multiple cards trying to dig for the removal spell, she's going to be pinging them every single time. Then you combine it with cards like Fell Stinger, which is going to be legal in standard as well. Like, that and Fell Stinger is 6 damage directly to your opponent's face. Like, that's awesome. Like,
Yeah, that could just
that's
end the
just
game.
yeah, actually, that's exactly 100%. Yeah, you can just for the final blow, the final bit of damage, you can just nuke your opponent directly in the face by exploiting a Fell Stinger and targeting it at them. Like by all means, please draw 2 cards. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, Sign and Blood style effects like that are very powerful with Sheoldred. So, I mean, also with wheels, any format where you can hit like an emergency powers or a good old fashioned Wheel of Fortune, give everybody 7 fresh cards. I mean, that's just vicious. The sheer life swing you can get with that. So, I mean, I think this card is going to see a lot of play. We're definitely going to see it in standard. I think it is shockingly effective in standard. The fact that it's a 4/5 body for 4 with Death Touch on top of everything else is pretty insane. Because like she kind of dominates the board when she's on it, while picking your opponent down just for playing the game and buffing you
And you
up
gain
just for
life.
playing the game.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
gain life. Like
exactly.
against aggressive decks, this card's great. It's got 5 toughness, so it can
Hmm.
usually block almost anything. It's going to trade because it already has Death Touch, so it's good against big, beefy green decks. And yeah, you gain life. Every turn, you're gaining 2 just for drawing cards. And if you have extra draw spells, and you're gaining even more.
Hmm.
And then, just like you said, I mean, if your opponent's digging, drawing cards just to find the answer, if that's just even part of their strategy, I mean, they're going to end up taking a lot. Like this card could single-handedly deal 10 or more damage by
Hmm.
itself in the course of the game.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like I said, this by itself can be your win condition. You
Oh,
know?
sometimes without even attacking. Yeah, it's yeah, nuts. Absolutely nuts.
Yeah, expect to see this get played in
Hmm.
a lot of different decks, and
Oh
potentially,
yeah.
just like you said, a lot of different formats as well.
Yep. Red mages everywhere. If you just like end up scooping the moment this hits the field, we all understand. You know, because it's
Yeah, because the life gain
we get
plus
it. The
a
life gain
card you
is
just can't beat
gonna be
through. I
brutal.
mean, you need an Ember
Yeah,
Cleave for this one.
totally. Yeah.
Definitely need Ember Cleave. Next card here on the list is actually, so we're going to talk about the card that we have up this high, and then we're actually going to talk about the cycle. So you might
Hmm.
already know what we're going to talk about. So number 3 on the list, we have Defiler of Vigor. This card is so strong. 3 colorless, 2 green for a 6/6 trample, Phyrexian Worm. As an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 green less to cast. If you paid life this way, this effect can only reduce the amount of green mana you pay, and then whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So on rate, 5 mana 6/6 trample. You can pay life to make your spells cost less. And then if you get to play those spells and they're permanent spells, then all your creatures get bigger for each one that you cast. And then on top of that, there's 1 for each color. So the red one, 2 colorless, 2 red, 4/4 first strike. Same thing, you can pay 2 life to make your permanent red spells 1 less, 1 red less. Whenever you cast a red permanent spell, it deals 1 damage to any target. The black one, 2 colorless, 2 black, 4/4 menace. Whenever you cast a black permanent spell, target creature control gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. The blue one ends up being a 5 mana, 3 colorless, 2 blue, 4/3 with flying. You get to draw a card whenever you cast a blue permanent. The white one, 3 colorless, 2 white, 5/5 vigilance. Whenever you cast a white permanent spell, you get to make a 1/1 white soldier creature token, and they all have that clause of reducing the colored mana if you pay life for it. So if you have more than one of these defilers down, you can spend 4 life to almost play anything for free at this point.
Mm,
As long as it's 2 mana or less, and let's say it's those colors
actually,
of mana.
the way that that's worded, it only impacts one
Oh, so even
of
if you have
the
multiple
pips.
ones, okay,
Yeah, no, I
okay,
did look that up. Yeah, so
okay.
so in yeah, you only get to Phyrexianize one
So
of
there's
the
a
mana
drawback
values.
to it.
There's a drawback. Yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, no, but so if you have the Defiler Vigor down, you can't just drop, uh like the Elf Lord or any kind of 2 green
Okay.
spell for 4 life, unfortunately. But if you have a Llanowar Elves and you want to drop that for yeah, anyway,
Couple
if you have a
life,
one
then yeah,
drop,
that
if you have
feels
a
pretty
one
good.
drop, you can
Yep.
play it for 2 life. That's fine. But yeah,
So Defiler Vigor by itself, that I think it's the best one, right? Like on raid, it's
oh yeah,
good, and then the effect, obviously putting a count on each creature control, it's just a Verdurous Gear Hulk. And then yeah, making your spells cost less. I mean, that's insanely powerful. The red one's really good as well because you can kind of burn your
mm-hmm,
opponent out in the Ignis combo deck or even just any red deck in general.
mm-hmm.
Ham, what do you think about the green one and what do you think about the cycle overall?
So I think it's really interesting because I think every card in the cycle has its place. I think they all are good at what they do, but and while it looks like they're all doing something very similar, I think at the end of the day they all kind of fill different roles in their different archetypes. And I do agree that Defiler Vigor is probably the best. Like by a lot actually, if I'm honest, because when I first read Defiler of Vigor, it reminded me very much of when I first read Questing Beast. The experience of reading through that text box, you're like, okay, where's the downside? All right, where's the downside? It's got to be coming. Where's the downside? Holy crap, there's no downside. This is all upside. Are you kidding me? It's kind of it's got that feel to it. It's just incredibly powerful, and that ability of whenever you cast a green permanent spell, you buff the entire team with a counter. Get out of here. I mean, stuff's going to get really big really fast. We care about modified stuff from Kamigawa. That's that archetype is viable here. This modifies your entire team, so that gets out of hand really fast. Um, and on top of that, like being able to play Phyrexian mana for stuff is just awesome. Being able to pay 2 life to reduce any one of your permanent spells by 1 in all the different colors, based on the Defiler, whatever cycle you're looking at. Um, the fact that they all give you that ability and they all then trigger if you take advantage of it, I think is really cool. The red one, for example, which is also a Kavu, which is fun. Being able to ping things down, being able to remove pesky blockers, I think in aggressive decks, that's excellent. And also there are a ton of great 1-drops in red. And so if you have a
Oh
decent
yeah.
life total, because you're the person applying the pressure throughout the course of the game, later on, you hit that Kavu, whatever cards you have in your hand, there's a really good chance you're gonna be able to just vomit them on the board right away, and
Yep.
you just machine gun your whatever blockers your opponent have down, swing with the whole team. You're just continuing to apply pressure,
Play my
or
Ember Cleave for 1.
right? Why not, right?
Like, play my Ember Cleave for 1 and then you
Yeah,
take 1 damage.
yeah, that kind of stuff is absolutely gross. You get that kind of stuff will be possible with that. Also the Defiler of Flesh, the black one, is a zombie. Now it only gives +1/+1 in menace when you cast a um black permanent spell, but it gives your attackers menace.
Mhm.
So that's meaningful. And it makes, so we're talking about Embercleave in red. Well, black, you can reduce the cost of Meat Hook Massacre by 1. So that can be
Ooh,
pretty powerful in
that's
certain situations.
gross. Oh
Right?
no, 1 and X.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so disgusting. And I think that
So,
menace is understated. I think that
oh, Menace is
what
good.
we
Yeah,
learned from
absolutely.
Eye of the Hive Tyrant or Hive whatever Hive of
Oh,
the
Hive
Hive
of the Eye
Tyrant,
Tyrant. Yeah, yeah.
Defiler Flesh can get out of control. Like they
Mm-hmm.
have to double block to kill it, and then you can also start to make your other stuff have to be double blocked. And then
Mm-hmm.
let's say you do have a Shield Dread or something with Death Touch down, like the Sleeper Agent as well. Now your opponent's like definitely like in some sticky situations where they
Oh,
don't
big
want to
time.
be double blocking.
Mm-hmm.
The Defiler Dreams is great because it refills your hand, right? Like if you play more of these blue permanent spells.
Mm-hmm.
And the Defiler of Faith in White is just great because, well, even though it's 5 mana, it is really good. Like post board wipe, you can play it and then play like maybe like what even if you just play 1/1 drop, you get another 1/1 token, so your
Mm-hmm.
board's like completely rebuilt.
Yeah. Yeah,
On
you're
top
back
of that,
online right away.
I think that's something that's not stated with these is that these are great even in multicolor decks. All that
Yes.
matters is that you're casting the permanents that have just that one color in them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still going to be able to get the effect. So these cards aren't just good in monocolored decks. Like
Oh,
these
yeah.
cards could end up being really good in multicolored decks as well.
Oh, totally. Well, and that's huge because right now, again, between Capenna and Dominaria, there are a ton of 2 and 3 color creatures, many of whom are legendary that are running around right now. So why not mix and match some of those, get double triggers off your defilers, reduce the cost. Now that's a situation where you could reduce the cost of multiple by multiples. You know, if you have the Defiler of Dreams, the blue one, and the Defiler of Flesh, the black one down, your Urtai you can cast for just 4 life and 2.
Yep.
Um, and it triggers both of the Defiler's triggers. So just for as an example. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Multicolored decks could take advantage of these in some really cool ways.
Definitely. So yeah, the whole Defiler cycle, be on the lookout. My guess would be is that you're going to see some of them get played up front
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning, like the green one that we have picked here, and then the red one. And
Yep.
then as the months go by here, the weeks go by, everyone's going to start to realize that there's a place for all of them in some
Mm-hmm.
form or another. And you're kind of just going to be wondering, like, wow, they printed these somewhat broken cards that have all these additional abilities, and you're going to be losing to them in
Yeah.
potentially all kinds of different formats. And like I said, like maybe we see some now and then we see different ones later, depending on what cards get printed on top of that, knowing that there's going to be some other stuff out there that could potentially make these even better.
Totally. Yeah, I think the blue and the white ones are going to have the toughest homes in standard right out of the gate. But at the same time, I'm not trying to discount it because they may see a home. They are powerful cards. But I
Hmm.
think the Jund ones, the green, red, and black are going to be the ones that you see more often right away.
Yeah, they're all on curve. 5
Hmm.
mana. Even though the green one's 5, I mean that's still kind of like a sweet spot for that deck, considering you're getting a big beefy threat.
Totally.
But for blue and white and their quote unquote more aggressive type strategy is going to be a little bit more difficult,
Yeah.
considering that usually the blue deck is more of like a cheaper, efficient tempo deck, and the white deck is also a cheaper, more efficient beatdown strategy. So, gonna be interesting to see where all these slot in, but I definitely expect to see this cycle and be tired of it in about a couple months. Um,
Absolutely.
so speaking of being tired of a card, our next card on the list is one that a lot of people already know. It's actually the biggest reprint we've seen in a very long time, if not ever, into standard. And that's Liliana of the Veil. Two colorless, or excuse me, two black and a colorless. 3 loyalty, legendary planeswalker Liliana. +1, each player discards a card. -2, target player sacks a creature. -6, separate all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice. Liliana of the Veil has been a card. It's one of the best cards potentially ever printed in Magic's history. Um, it's been a card that we've seen quite a bit in Modern. When it was first in Standard, it was played, but it wasn't like a format-defining card at all. This time around, I actually think that with Shieldred and some of the other cards that we've seen in this set and already exist, knowing that Black's been getting a little bit more of a push here, Graveyard Trespasser, things like that, I actually think that this is the time for Liliana to kind of stick out and shine, wouldn't you say?
Oh, totally. It's funny too because going into this rotation, I thought Mono Black was going to drop off. No, Mono Black is stronger than ever. I mean, just think about the ideal curve here. You've got Raven Man on 2, Liliana on 3, Sheoldred on 4, Invoke Despair on 5. I mean, that is just non-stop power from start to finish. And
Removal and
Liliana,
threats, right?
yeah, they're all like those are must answer threats on every single point of your curve. Granted, again, magical Christmas land scenario to hit the lands and those cards right on time, but still, that curve can be broken up in a number of different ways. You're still hitting great stuff, you know. And Liliana is a key piece of that. Like this is one of those cards that, like, it is kind of skill testing. Like you need to be able to, you need to know when to hit which mode. But my goodness, they're powerful. Yeah,
And
I
on
mean, being
top of
able to,
that, like
yeah.
it's gonna even get played more now. So like it's gonna be available in Pioneer. It's
Hmm.
gonna be available in Explorer. Like this is a card that you're gonna see it in those Rakdos mid range decks. You're gonna see
Oh,
this
totally.
card in a Rakdos mid range deck in Standard as well. Like the Anvil
Yep.
decks wouldn't mind this card. It's like a
No.
slow, grindy effect. On top of that, it's really good against other mid range decks where maybe they only have like 1 or 2 creatures out at a time and they're still valuable creatures. Um, yeah, just man, this card's it's efficient, right? 3 mana is great. Uh, the first 2 abilities on it are fantastic, and if you ever even get that ultimate, it's usually just like GG's.
Right.
Making your opponent sometimes choose like whatever permanents they have or their lands, things like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it gets out of control pretty quickly. I think that Liliana the Veil, um, I think that there is a lot of, potentially some talk about whether or not it's not going to be as strong this time around. I think originally it wasn't that strong, but I think that this time it's actually going to be stronger.
Yeah, I can see it. I think the pieces are here. Yeah.
Definitely. So Liliana the Veil, our number 2 card. Be on the lookout for it. Obviously an iconic card. I know that we didn't really talk too much about it, but most of the time a lot of you have already seen it, and anyone who's new, you're definitely going to be in a treat, knowing that this card is going to be in standard for another like year, about year and a
Yeah.
half.
Well, and for anybody who's not as familiar with the card, one thing like PSA style that I just need to get out there, as somebody who also is fairly new to playing with Liliana the Veil, because I'm not a modern player myself, um, that downtick of target player sacrifices a creature doesn't seem that bad at first when you're first reading the card, because you think, oh, I'll probably have something lying around that I can dump so I don't have to get rid of my big threat, right? But she's dropping on turn 3. So the chances of you actually having multiple creatures down is not that great. So if you hit a Graveyard Trespasser or your Fable of the Mirror Breaker on 3 and you're feeling like hot stuff, Lily drops, down tick, your board's gone. Granted, Fable, you still have the Saga, but with like a Graveyard Trespasser, that's it. It's over. You're like that creature's gone now. Your turn is undone. They now have a Planeswalker, and they can start upticking. You need to be able to deal direct damage to her somehow, or she's going to start making you discard cards immediately. And you better pray she never gets to that ult, because the game's over. It's a 3-mana Planeswalker that puts you in immediate pressure and potentially puts you on a clock to end the game, especially if she can start upticking right away. So, like, I don't know. She's one of those, when you first read her, she's like, it's like, yeah, it's good, but is it that good? It's like, yes. Yes, she is.
Yeah, like imagine this scenario: you're on the play, you're like, yeah, I just played my 3-drop Graveyard Trespasser. I just play, whatever 3-drop you can imagine in your head.
Yeah.
Everything's looking good, and then all of a sudden your opponent like plays their third land, plays the Liliana, makes you sacrifice a creature, and then now you're like, oh, I don't have any. Wait, the creature lands rotated, so I don't have any creature lands
Right.
to attack the Liliana, and maybe they killed my first couple of threats or my first card that I played with another removal spell, and then now they're gonna start uptaking Liliana, and I got a discard card, so it's just, yeah, you're gonna see this card often, and there's gonna be a chance you're gonna start to really hate this card and think that it's just, you're like, why did they reprint this? But I think that there's still some answers for it in the format for sure. Cards are a lot different now than they used to be,
Mm-hmm.
more aggressive. So we'll see. I think obviously we have it pretty high on the list as number 2. So we both agree that it's gonna get played. But it could also end up being a card where maybe it's better in sideboards in some meta games. But on top of that, I mean, it's like Thoughtseize. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Thoughtseize is always good, right?
Oh,
even if
totally.
even if the Thoughtseize is in your sideboard, I mean,
You still want it.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
you still want it a lot of the time. So
Well,
yeah, I
and the
expect to
other,
see this card for sure.
another 3-mana Planeswalker that has been relatively underwhelming is Ob Nixilis. And Ob Nixilis hates on the hand. And if it doesn't hit on the hand, it hates on the life total. Well, Liliana just hates on the hand. So if you can get both of them in play, could you imagine a board state where Liliana and 2 Obs are in play?
I just
I mean,
really like
that's just vicious. Yeah.
Liliana, Ob Nixilis, and Jaya, and you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of make like a red black Planeswalker like Super Friends deck.
Wow.
And then on top of that, you play all your removals. So then your win conditions are just, all of a sudden you're like, wait, didn't like the Teferi deck used to be like a Planeswalker deck, and then now instead you just play Anvil and removal spells, and maybe a bit of some
Huh.
hand disruption, and you play Liliana, Ob Nixilis, and Jaya, because the Jaya can help feed the Ob Nixilis if it needs
Yep.
to. Obviously, the Ob Nixilis and the Liliana is a combo where the Liliana first uptick they have to discard a card, and then your second uptick from your other 2 Ob Nixilis makes them really want to choose if they want to take that damage, and then your Jaya makes a 1/1 monk that gets bigger if you play your other planeswalkers, your other spells, and on top of that can give you some card advantage to help refill. It doesn't even put the card in your hand, it lets you play it so you can still uptick your Lily. I mean, I think there's a place for potentially this deck. I mean, what are you
Absolutely. Yeah.
thinking?
Rakdos Super Friends, are we doing this?
I mean, I'm
I'm
telling you,
aboard.
I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised. Like the
Yeah,
cards are
or
there, you know.
I mean, or you could even shift it a little bit, go Grixis, you get Kaito in the mix. I mean, then it gives you access to some
Ooh,
bounce spells, maybe a couple counters. Like
yeah.
the opportunity is like there's something there. Yeah,
And
there's
on
definitely
top
something
of
there.
that, I love Rafine. I already
Oh,
see Rafine,
so
Shieldred,
good.
and Liliana all being really good friends here.
Big time.
Discarding lots of cards, maybe reanimating some things. Making your
Hmm.
opponent sack some creatures. Yeah, definitely lots of brewing and lots of different decks that Liliana kind of
Hmm.
essentially makes by just existing. So number 2 card, Liliana the Veil. Definitely be on the lookout for it in a lot of different decks. You're gonna be you might not be tired of this one by the time it ends up rotating here next year. So our number 1 card on the list, Hammer, we have an actually spicy card at number 1. It's
Yes.
kind of a controversial card here after early access day 1,
Hmm.
and kind of just like what a lot of different people are just thinking right now, just from the start. So we have Joda. So Joda is back as usual. Joda's 5 colors. So white, blue, black, red, green, one of each. It's a 5/5 Joda unifier, legendary creature, human wizard. Legendary creatures you control get +X+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. So no matter what, with just a Joda out, your legendary creatures will get +1/+1. But hey, if you've got more than one, they're already going to get +2/+2, right? So on
Right.
top of that, it has a keyword on it that isn't keyworded. Essentially gives
Right.
your legendary spells cascade, and then you cascade into other legendary spells. What does that mean for anybody who's new to the game? Whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You can cast that card without paying its mana cost, and the rest go randomly on the bottom of your library. Hammer, what's always been really messed up about Cascade is that you can plan your cascade into what you want to cascade into.
Hmm.
And even though it might be a little bit harder to do in standard, in older formats it just gets easier. But in standard, I actually think that this card's still going to be a player. Essentially, it's giving off some type of like Omnath vibes. Like it doesn't draw a card when it comes in, but if it remains unchecked, if you cast like let's say we talked about Rith,
Hmm.
you Rith into Ashana, then all of a sudden you have quite a lot going on. Two different types of strategies on the battlefield that your opponent has to deal with, and yeah, the game can get out of control pretty quickly. Or I mean, I don't know.
Hmm.
You play your Joda, you play your 5-drop, you hit like a Kalidas. I mean, obviously these aren't like optimal plays that I'm talking about, but they're all still powerful things that could just happen. I mean, or like one of your uh, picks here that we talked about earlier was Urtai. So
Hmm.
you have Joda out, and then you Urtai counter your opponent's spell, even if your opponent's drawn a card. You actually don't even care because you're probably going to cascade into something that you want at 3-drop.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you cascade into a 3-drop or lower. Yeah. Well, and on top of that, like, but I think actually the fact that you're able to come up just off the top of your head, even after we've been yammering for what 2 hours or however long we've been
Mm-hmm.
going today, um, you're able to come up with these cascade possibilities. At the end of the day, you put Joda in a deck with some good legendaries that kind of get along together, it's going to be busted because the moment Joda is online, you cast any of those legendary creatures, you're going to be spinning into others. And there are some phenomenal legends all the way down to 1 mana in this set or in this format in standard right now. The only 1 mana card I can think of actually is that I can think of is Errant Street Artist. That's a
Mm-hmm.
1 mana legendary who really only works if you're copying stuff. So maybe that doesn't, maybe that's not that great of a hit. But we have 2-drop legends all over the place, including one that I actually really like with Joda is the Reality Chip from Kamigawa. It's oftentimes that you think of it as an equipment, but the truth is it is also a legendary creature. So that's a permanent. We even have legendary mana rocks. We talked about Timeless Lotus earlier. Obviously, Timeless Lotus and Joda go along beautifully because that gives you all the mana you need to cast Joda plus whatever else. Um, one line that is possible is Teferi, Who Slows the Sunset on 4, Timeless Lotus on 5, uptick Teferi, untap Timeless Lotus, tap, get Joda in play on turn 5. Like, if
Or
you can
turn
pull that
3 if you
off,
ramped it out. Like let's say
or
you
turn 3 if
played
you ramp it, exactly.
yeah, like
Your
your
lone
elf
speaker or whatever,
creatures
yeah,
and stuff. Yep. Yeah, your lone
absolutely.
speaker.
It's not
Um
hard. But even then, and later in the game, and that's the thing with Timeless Lotus, if you have multiple Timeless Lotuses in your deck, yeah, you get one to get Joda out, fine. But what happens if you top deck one late in the game? Well, you just cast it and you cascade into a 4-drop legend. You're feeling fine.
yeah.
Like,
You use the other Lotus to draw a card or put it directly onto the battlefield. That's what you do
right?
now. That
I mean,
just that's
and on top,
nuts.
not only is there the Lotus, we also have Celestis is a 3-drop legendary. We have freaking Meat Hook Massacre as a legendary permanent. I mean, so many things are incidentally legendary. Now, I don't think Meat Hook would work particularly well with Joda because you cascade into it a lot. It would enter with 0
Well,
as the number, but
i-
still.
if it's worded how I think that it's worded, like how Cascade is, Cascade you can pay X spells into it, so you can potentially hit the meat hook and still be able to X into it, which is still pretty
Really?
decent. Yep.
I don't know. It's because this isn't keyworded. I don't know if they would still work that way, but that's an interesting, definitely something to look into.
Yeah.
About
Um,
anyway.
but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that this card is you, there's a chance that
It's
this
good.
card is really messed up,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
you're gonna get tired of it immediately, mostly because of cards like Kami War. Like the
hmm
fact that you can just play Kami War, already get like a removal spell from it, and then on top of that, now you get to play something else out of your deck,
Common War
for
actually isn't legendary.
free. Just oh, it's not legendary.
No, Common War is not legendary. It
Oh
wouldn't trigger this.
man, okay, so
Thank goodness, right?
wow.
Holy cow, that'd be
Oh,
insane.
okay. So maybe okay. So maybe that's not
Dodged
one.
a bullet
So
there for sure.
yeah, man, I got really excited about Christmas Land there. Um, so man, maybe what 5 color things can we do with this really like right now? Do you think?
Let me take. I want to. I'm
Um,
gonna go ahead and take a look.
I mean,
Let's see.
it's still an obviously powerful card. I'm mostly just thinking in the 5 color retrospect because obviously
hmm
legendary creatures come in all the colors and especially specifically the multicolors.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. They come in all different shapes and sizes for sure.
So I mean,
Well,
don't
and we
get me
haven't.
wrong, this card's still pretty busted. Like you're gonna be doing some crazy stuff with this card for sure.
Oh, 100%. But no, like we have, like Golden Argosy is legendary. We have Grease Fang. I mean, there are a ton of. I mean, all the Goshintai is it? Like you can go shrines with this. We have Henrika, Halana, and Elena, Ishin, Hinata. Um, yeah, Ivy we were talking about earlier. I mean, yeah, Jetmir, Taxis. I mean, like all the Kamigawa dragons. As far as like full 5 color is concerned, the most I've seen is 3. Lagrell the Magpie would work really nicely in there too. Can you imagine cascading into her? That'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah, and then doing a bunch of
Um,
other stuff.
yeah, we got Xander. Yeah, no, I'm not seeing any. Yeah, any big, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of 3-color ones. I mean, Rafine, of course. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
Rafine, Riff.
this card's
I mean,
strong.
there's a lot. There's a lot.
You're gonna see Joda. You're gonna see a deck out there that's 5 colors, and it still plays the Kami War because that card is just strong.
hmm
Overall, I mean, I think that if there's a 5 color deck, it's because of Joda.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
I think that it's almost guaranteed. And on top of that, you're gonna see domain like there's so many things you can do in 5 colors. It's kind of
hmm
absurd, right? Like if that deck exists, then your mid all your mid range strategies are kind of out the window because you're just gonna play all the best cards
Yep.
in the Joda deck, which is kind of scary.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
that's where maybe that red deck comes in handy, where your opponent's trying to do something greedy and you just can flatline them before they do
hmm
anything. But
Oh, that's what it's
uh,
gonna take. If and that's actually one of the concerns about like. Well, you mentioned the O word when we were looking at Joda and Omnath. The thing that made the reason Omnath got banned is when Omnath hit, it was not uncommon for the amount of value that it generated. Sometimes even the turn it dropped, you didn't even have to wait to untap most of the time. You were able to just pop off and run away with the game immediately. Joda does have that kind of potential. The potential to get, if you ramp hard enough and your mana is fixed, which is a big ask to be fair, but if you can hit those requirements, stick Joda, do some kind of follow up, it's gonna get really big, really, really, really fast.
100%.
It's the amount of you're gonna be able to run away on turn 5 or 6, and your opponent's gonna be looking at your board state going, "How the hell did you do that?" And it's like, well, Joda lets you do that because not only are you casting double legendaries every time you cast one. I mean, this is Cabaret Revels for legends, is what you're doing, and the idea of paying out 4 mana legendary, getting a 3 for free, and if they're both creatures, they give your entire squad +2/+2 just by existing on the field. I mean, this card is insane. Like, the amount of value this thing can generate is absolutely nuts.
Yep.
So,
Yeah,
be on
this
the lookout for
card,
this
this
thing.
card just gets out of hand, and I mean, we didn't even talk about the first ability. Like, the fact
Right?
that your legendaries get bigger, equal to the number, like each one of your legendaries essentially it's buffing itself, and then
Mm-hmm.
overall just buffing everyone. Is just, oh, this card is so. This is a 5 mana 6/6.
Yeah, by itself, it's 5
Yeah,
minutes,
by
6/6.
itself
Yeah.
it's a 5 mana. Like, oh, this card's so nuts, man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be worried about this. This is gonna be one on my
Mm-hmm.
list. Um, when I first read it, I was like, yeah, that's powerful. And then the more I read it, the more I saw it in action. It was like, yeah, that card has the potential to really mess some things up and
Mm-hmm.
make decks. And yeah, I mean, that's the type of card that I think the Niv Mizzet deck it helps
Mm-hmm.
as well. Just in Omnath, even in Explorer,
Yeah.
Omnath and this could be like best friends.
Yeah, totally. And I've heard some rumblings, and I've heard people asking, like, how long do you think it's going to be until Liliana gets banned in Standard? I'm like, I'm not worried about Liliana. Keep an eye on Joda.
Yeah, I think
You know,
Liliana is going to be really good, but there's ways of dealing with it. I think that
agreed. Yeah, I
cards
don't.
like Joda have more of an explosiveness to them
Mm-hmm.
that could lead to some problems. But you know what? I'm just gonna hope that even Liliana itself can keep Joda in check, right?
Yeah. Well, and okay, I've invoked the ban word. I have. I'm sorry. This is actually going to be the first time in Standard for years that we haven't had a ban.
Mm-hmm.
As of this rotation, so that's exciting, and hopefully that continues. And I think it will. I
Yeah.
think Standard is going to stay in a good place for some time, and I don't think Joda is ban worthy. I'm not calling for a ban on Joda. In 2 months, if people are calling for a ban on Joda, I'm going to understand where they're coming from. Let me put it that way. Like, I don't know that it's truly ban worthy, but we all might be sick of this card before too long.
You have to remember with Cascade, you can choose how you build your deck.
Mm-hmm.
So you can choose to play Joda and then play higher cost legendary spells just to hit that one other card in your deck
Yeah,
that
exactly.
you
You
want to
can
hit. Let's say
have,
your cards are all
yeah,
5 mana, and then you could go hit your 3-drop legendary creature that you can get every single time that does something that's part of your strategy.
yeah.
That's definitely an option.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure which legend that is yet, but yeah, you could. If you have a 3 or 4 drop legend that is just your combo enabler, just run a bunch of 5-drop legends. And that's where your 5-drop planeswalkers and things like that can come in. And just there you go. Joda finds you whatever your combo piece is. Yeah, good stuff. I'm not sure exactly what that deck is yet, but it's out there.
Yeah,
It's
it could be out there.
waiting to be made. Yeah.
Yep, 100%. So yeah, lots of powerful cards. We have to remember with this set specifically, there is going to be a rotation. So a lot of cards that already exist are on their way out. I really, really appreciate anyone who's made it this far into the video. We've been going for
Yes.
about 3 hours straight
Holy
here,
cow.
kind of going over all the rares of mythics, at least about like 90% of them. There's a few that we missed that I didn't really think were too outstanding that we really had to talk about, but really appreciate if you made it this far. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button, bell notification, leave a comment down below. Tell us what you think of our top 10, and maybe even give us your top 10 down below. That would be really, really awesome if you
Definitely.
did. I know that me personally, this set is really, really special. It's kind of like the culmination of Magic's history in 30 years, of story that has been created in 30 years, kind of coming into a culmination, kind of just being this awesome kind of finale in a few different sets here over the next 9 months or so. And I'm excited to play these cards today when you see this video. I'm excited to play these cards just overall and kind of see where we go from here. But Ham, any closing remarks on the set?
No, I have to echo that sentiment, man. This set is sweet. It's a beautiful, um, it's a beautiful kind of culmination of where Magic has come from, where Magic is. I love the fact that we have old enemies in the Phyrexians, old friends in Joda, Squee, the Weatherlight itself, and Ajani, of course. Um, the fact that things are getting real. We have some cool story beats that the lore is fascinating in its own right as well, which is like I don't know, every part of this set, and on top of it, mechanically, it seems like they just hit it out of the park. Like part of the reason that this video is so long is because we had a really tough time narrowing down what cards to talk about, because they all look awesome. If we whittled it down to just a top 10 list, I mean, getting to the top 10 list was tricky enough as it was. But if we just whittled it down to only the top 10s without any kind of honorable mentions, we'd be leaving money on the table. We would leave so many things left unsaid.
Yeah, the spoilers kind of happened all at once, so we didn't
Mm-hmm.
really like with Capenna. There was a little bit more of like time spread out, so we had some time to kind of talk about all the cards in a
Mm-hmm.
few different videos before we got to our top 10 list. Where like that we had like only like a handful of honorable mentions.
Right.
Whereas this for this video specifically, what I really wanted was to talk about everything that we can and
Mm-hmm.
really dive in and say, hey, these are all the cards that have a potential to be constructed playable in the right circumstances. And on top of that, here are the top 10 cards that we think have the highest chance of seeing play in constructed, not just maybe commander, not just modern, but we got standard, historic, and even we touched it a little bit, maybe older formats like legacy and vintage with some of these cards. Like, there's a little bit of everything in this set for everyone, and I think that that's what makes a really good set. And on top of that, I mean, the nostalgia for a lot of us that have been invested in the game is kind of just phenomenal as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
overall, once again, really, really appreciate you making it this far into this video. And I hope that you're as excited as we are for this set. And yeah, definitely check out links to our content in the description below. You can find as well links below to the tournaments that we host, 3 free a month with cash prizes. So definitely get in on that. We have our standard event this coming Sunday. Get in on that fresh format with the new cards just coming out. So who knows what's going to be there? We don't have a defined meta yet. There
Mm-hmm.
could be any of the cards that we talked about in our top 10, or maybe even some of the cards that we had in our honorable mentions. Who knows? There's all kinds of
Yeah.
things going on out there. But overall, definitely be on the lookout for that down below. I appreciate you so much. Stay cheesy and stay safe. See you next time, everybody.